When exhaustion meets violence, survival becomes a choice, and sometimes that choice is made by a stranger's hands. Lena Carter never believed anyone would catch her when she fell. Not on that subway platform, not in life. But when her body finally gave out after 16 hours of nursing rounds and a boyfriend's fists waiting at home, gravity wasn't what stopped her descent. It was him, Adrian Valenti, a man whose world operated in shadows she couldn't imagine. What he saw in her bruised face that night changed everything. What she didn't know yet was that being saved would be harder than surviving ever was. If you're hooked, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far Lena's story travels. The fluorescent lights of Mount Sinai's emergency department had been burning Lena's retinas for the past 16 hours straight. Her feet screamed inside shoes that had stopped fitting properly 3 months ago, right around the time she'd stopped being able to afford new ones. The coffee she'd gulped down at hour 12 had turned to acid in her empty stomach, and her hands trembled slightly as she updated the last chart of her double shift. "Carter, you look like death," Marcus, one of the ER docs, said as he passed her station. His tone held concern, but he didn't stop walking. Nobody ever stopped. Everyone in this place was drowning. "Thanks, Marcus. Really lifting my spirits here." Lena's voice came out flatter than she intended. She used to have more fight in her, used to crack jokes even when exhaustion dragged at her bones. That was before Ethan, before she'd learned what it meant to be afraid in her own apartment, before survival became the only goal worth having. She clocked out at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before midnight. Technically, she'd worked past her scheduled time again, but she'd stopped tracking the unpaid minutes months ago. What was the point? The hospital was perpetually understaffed, the city was bleeding money, and nurses like her were expected to fill the gaps with their bodies and sanity until both gave out. The November air hit her face like a slap when she pushed through the staff exit. Cold enough to hurt, not quite cold enough to snow. Her coat, thin, bought secondhand 3 years ago, did almost nothing against the wind that whipped down East 100th Street. She should take the bus. It stopped 2 blocks from her apartment building in Washington Heights. But the bus cost $2.75, and she had exactly $11.32 in her checking account until Friday's direct deposit hit. Subway, it was. The walk to the 103rd Street station took 12 minutes. Lena counted each one, partly to stay alert, partly to keep herself from thinking about what waited at home. Ethan would be there. He was always there lately, ever since he'd lost the construction job he'd barely shown up for anyway. He'd be drunk. He was always drunk by midnight, and he'd have opinions about where she'd been, who she'd been with, why she thought she was so much better than him just because she had a job. None of those opinions would be expressed gently. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't need to look to know it was him. The buzzing had started around hour 14 of her shift, text after text, each one angrier than the last, demanding to know why she wasn't answering, accusing her of things that existed only in his paranoid, alcohol-soaked imagination. She'd stopped responding to Ethan's texts weeks ago. Responding made it worse. Ignoring him made it worse too, but at least ignoring him gave her a few hours of peace before she had to face the consequences. The subway station swallowed her whole. Yellow tile walls slick with decades of grime, the perpetual smell of piss and hot metal, the distant screech of trains that might arrive in 2 minutes or 20. The platform was relatively crowded for a Wednesday night. A cluster of teenagers laughed too loud near the far end. A man in a suit that had seen better days swayed slightly, clearly drunk or high or both. 2 women in hospital scrubs, different hospital, different color scheme, leaned against a pillar, their conversation low and tired. Lena found a spot near the middle of the platform and let her backpack slide to the ground. Her shoulders sang with relief at the lost weight. Inside the bag, 1 extra pair of socks, a water bottle she kept forgetting to refill, 3 granola bars she'd been rationing since Monday, and a paperback romance novel she hadn't had the energy to read in 6 weeks. She used to love reading, used to lose herself in stories about people whose problems resolved in 300 pages. Real life didn't work like that. Real life was standing on a subway platform at midnight, so tired your bones felt like they were dissolving, going home to a man who'd probably hit you, and having to get up in 11 hours to do it all again. The platform tilted slightly under her feet. Lena blinked hard, trying to clear the gray spots creeping into her vision. When was the last time she'd eaten? The granola bar at 6? Or had that been yesterday? The days blurred together lately, one endless loop of work and fear and exhaustion so deep it had become a physical presence in her body. She should sit down. The thought came to her clearly, almost clinically, her nursing training cataloging symptoms: lightheadedness, trembling hands, cold sweats despite the stuffiness of the underground station, vision going spotty around the edges. Classic signs of... The platform tilted again, harder this time. No, she realized distantly. The platform wasn't moving. She was. Lena's knees unlocked, and suddenly the ground was rushing up to meet her. She had time to think, absurdly, that the tile was going to be filthy, that she'd ruin her scrubs, that Ethan would ask questions about why she came home dirty, and she didn't hit the ground. Instead, there were hands, strong, steady, catching her under the arms and around the waist, taking her weight like it was nothing. For a confused second, Lena thought maybe she'd hallucinated the fall entirely, that her body had betrayed her, but physics had decided to grant mercy. Then she heard the voice. "Easy, I've got you." Male, calm. The kind of voice that didn't rush or panic, that suggested this man had caught falling women on subway platforms before, or at least that he was the type who didn't find it particularly alarming. Lena's eyes focused slowly. She was upright, barely, held in place by a stranger who'd moved fast enough to intercept her collapse. Her first impression was expensive. Wool coat, definitely cashmere, probably cost more than her monthly rent. Leather shoes that hadn't come from any store she could afford to enter. Watch that caught the terrible station lighting and threw it back in sharp little sparks. Then she looked at his face and forgot about the clothes entirely. He wasn't handsome in any conventional way. His features were too sharp for that. High cheekbones that cast shadows, a jaw that looked like it had been carved rather than grown, a nose that had definitely been broken at least once. Dark hair swept back from a face that might have been anywhere from 30 to 45, but it was his eyes that stopped her breath in her chest. Gray. Storm gray. The kind of eyes that saw everything and gave nothing back. The kind of eyes that were currently cataloging every inch of her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. "You fainted," the stranger said, still in that same level tone. A statement of fact, not a question. "I'm fine." The lie came automatically. Muscle memory from years of making herself smaller, less troublesome, easier to dismiss. "You can let go. I'm fine." His hands didn't move. "When did you last eat?" The question was so unexpected, so direct that Lena actually answered honestly. 6, maybe? I had a granola bar during my break." 6. He repeated it like she'd said something in a foreign language. "It's nearly midnight. I worked a double." That explains the scrubs. His eyes moved down, clinical and thorough. Not sexual. She'd learned to recognize that look years ago. But assessing. Taking inventory. When his gaze returned to her face, something had shifted in his expression. Something that made her stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. He'd seen them. The bruises. She'd been so careful. Concealer every morning, layered thick around her left eye where Ethan's ring had caught her 3 days ago. Long sleeves even in the overheated hospital, hiding the finger marks on her upper arms. Turtleneck under her scrubs to cover the place where his hands had wrapped around her throat last weekend when she'd made the mistake of contradicting him in front of his friends. But this stranger, this man in his expensive coat with his storm gray eyes, he'd seen through all of it in less than 30 seconds. "I'm fine," Lena said again, and this time she pulled away from his hands with enough force that he had to let go or hurt her. She stumbled slightly, caught herself against the pillar behind her. "Thank you for the catch. I just got dizzy. I'm fine." "You've said that 3 times now." He didn't move closer, but he didn't leave either. Just stood there, 2 feet away, watching her with those eyes that saw too much. People who are actually fine usually only need to say it once. "Well, maybe I just really want to make sure you heard me." "I heard you." A pause. "I don't believe you." Down the platform, the teenagers laughed at something on someone's phone. The drunk man had progressed to having an argument with himself. Somewhere above them, the city ground on with its endless noise, sirens and car horns and the particular kind of chaos that only New York after midnight could produce. Lena should walk away, should grab her bag, move to a different spot on the platform, put distance between herself and this too observant stranger. Should definitely not be standing here letting him look at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. But her legs felt like water, and the spots hadn't entirely cleared from her vision, and the thought of moving even 10 feet seemed insurmountably difficult. "When's your train?" the stranger asked. "A train?" Lena managed to put some starch in her voice. "The A train. It runs every 7 to 12 minutes this time of night, depending on whether the MTA is feeling generous. You live uptown, Washington Heights." He nodded like this confirmed something. "That's a 40-minute ride minimum. You're going to pass out again before you get there." "I'm not going to—" "You will." He cut her off, not rudely, just with absolute certainty. "You're hypothermic, hypoglycemic, and from the way you're holding yourself, I'd guess you're in significant pain. You need food, water, and somewhere warm to sit down. Probably medical attention too, but I'm guessing you won't accept that." Lena stared at him. "Are you a doctor?" "No." "Then maybe don't diagnose strangers on subway platforms." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Fair enough, but I'm still right." He was right. That was the most irritating part. Lena could feel her blood sugar somewhere in her feet, her body temperature dropping despite the relative warmth of the underground station. Every bruise and strained muscle making itself known now that adrenaline had stopped masking the pain. She was going to pass out again on the train. Or worse, she'd make it home conscious and then have to deal with Ethan while she was this weak. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a phone. Expensive, latest model, the kind Lena sometimes saw doctors carrying. He typed something quickly, then looked back at her. "I have a car 2 blocks from here. My driver can be at the station entrance in 3 minutes. I'll take you somewhere you can eat and sit down for 20 minutes. After that, if you still want to go home, I'll have you driven wherever you need to go." No strings, no expectations, just food and a chair. Every instinct Lena had developed growing up in 3 different foster homes screamed that this was a terrible idea. Strange men didn't offer help out of kindness. They didn't catch you when you fell and then propose taking you somewhere in their private car. They wanted something. They always wanted something. But she was so tired, tired of being afraid, tired of being hungry, tired of standing on subway platforms in the middle of the night, trying to convince herself that going home was better than any alternative. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. The stranger's expression shifted again. Softened, maybe, though it was hard to tell with a face that seemed designed to give nothing away. "Because," he said quietly, "I know what it looks like when someone is out of options, and I don't like watching people suffer when I can do something about it." Before Lena could respond, headlights swept across the tunnel. The A train roared into the station, brakes screeching, doors opening with their familiar chime. The crowd on the platform surged forward. The teenagers pushed past. The drunk man stumbled toward the nearest door. The stranger didn't move, just stood there, watching her, waiting. Lena looked at the train, at the open doors, at the path that led to her apartment, to Ethan, to the same nightmare she'd been living for 8 months. She looked back at the stranger. 20 minutes, she heard herself say, and then I want to go home. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She didn't want to go home. She just didn't know what else to say. The stranger nodded once. 20 minutes. He gestured toward the stairs, then fell into step beside her as she picked up her backpack and started walking. Behind them, the train doors chimed and closed. The A train pulled away, carrying everyone else uptown, leaving Lena Carter walking in the wrong direction with a man whose name she didn't even know. The stairs felt like climbing a mountain. Each step required negotiation between her brain and her legs, a conscious effort to keep moving upward. The stranger stayed close, not touching, but near enough that if she stumbled again, he'd catch her. She could feel his attention on her like physical pressure, though when she glanced over, he was looking straight ahead, giving her the illusion of privacy. The November air hit harder coming out than it had going in. Lena's teeth started chattering immediately. She tried to clench her jaw to stop it, but her body had stopped taking orders. A car waited at the curb. Black, sleek, the kind of town car that screamed money so loudly Lena almost turned around and went back down to the platform. A man in a dark suit stood by the rear door, older, maybe 60, with the kind of face that had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. "Adrian," the driver said by way of greeting. Not sir, not Mr. Valenti, just the first name, spoken with the ease of long familiarity. So the stranger had a name. Adrian. "Marcus. Change of plans. We're making a stop before heading to the office." Marcus's eyes flicked to Lena, and she saw him take in the same inventory his employer had. The scrubs, the exhaustion, the barely concealed damage. But unlike Adrian, Marcus's expression didn't change at all. He just nodded and opened the rear door. "Where to?" "Somewhere quiet. 24-hour, preferably with actual food, not just coffee." "I know a place." Adrian gestured for Lena to get in first. She hesitated, every foster kid's survival instinct firing warnings. But then a gust of wind cut through her thin coat, and her knees tried to unlock again, and the choice between a warm car and standing on a freezing sidewalk stopped being a choice at all. The interior smelled like leather and something else. Expensive cologne, maybe, or just the particular scent of money. The seats were heated. Lena sank into soft cushioning and had to suppress a sound that was embarrassingly close to a moan. When was the last time she'd sat in something this comfortable? Adrian slid in beside her, maintaining a careful distance. Marcus closed the door and rounded to the driver's seat. The engine purred to life, barely audible, nothing like the bus or subway or the third-hand Honda Civic Ethan had crashed 6 months ago. They pulled into traffic, and Lena watched the familiar streets of East Harlem slide past the window. She should be scared, should be planning escape routes, memorizing turns, preparing for whatever came next. Instead, she was warm for the first time in hours, sitting down for the first time in 16 hours, and her body had decided that was all that mattered. "How long have you been a nurse?" Adrian's voice cut through her drifting thoughts. Lena turned to look at him. In the better lighting of the car, she could see more details. The fine lines around his eyes, the silver starting to thread through his dark hair, the way he sat, perfectly still, perfectly controlled, like someone who'd trained himself never to waste movement. 4 years, she said. Well, 3 years and 8 months. You like it? Did she? Lena tried to remember if she'd ever liked it, or if nursing had just been the most practical option after aging out of foster care with no money, no family, and a desperate need for employment that came with benefits. I'm good at it, she said instead. That's not the same thing, but it counts for something. Adrian nodded like this made perfect sense. What would you do if you could do anything? The question caught her off guard. People didn't ask her things like that. They asked when she could pick up extra shifts, why she looked so tired, what was wrong with her now. Nobody asked about dreams or possibilities or what Lena Carter might want if the world operated on something other than necessity and survival. I don't know, she admitted. Then, because the darkness and the warmth and the sheer strangeness of this whole situation had loosened something in her chest, she added, I used to think about teaching. Elementary school, maybe. I liked kids before. She stopped. Before what? Before foster care taught her that attachment was liability? Before Ethan taught her that wanting things only gave people weapons to use against you? Before you learned it wasn't practical. Adrian finished, his tone neutral. Something like that. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Lena watched the city pass. Bodegas with their lights still blazing, late-night diners, clusters of people on corners who might have been waiting for buses or dealers or just somewhere to exist for a while. New York after midnight was a different animal than New York during the day. Hungrier, meaner, more honest about what it wanted and what it would do to get it. Marcus turned onto a quieter street and pulled up in front of a diner Lena didn't recognize. The neon sign said Athena's in blue and white, and through the windows she could see maybe a dozen people scattered across booths, shift workers, insomniacs, people like her who had nowhere better to be. 20 minutes, Adrian said, echoing her earlier words. Food, water, warmth, then wherever you want to go. Lena nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. Didn't trust that if she opened her mouth, something other than okay might come out. Something like, please don't make me go home, or I don't think I can do this anymore, or I'm so fucking tired of pretending I'm fine. Marcus opened the door. Cold air rushed in, but it didn't reach Lena the same way it had before. Adrian got out first, then offered his hand. She looked at it for a long moment. Clean, manicured nails, calluses that suggested he worked with his hands despite the expensive clothes, a thin white scar across his knuckles that looked old and well-earned. She took it. His grip was warm, steady, exactly strong enough to help her out without making her feel weak. The moment her feet were solidly on the sidewalk, he let go. The diner's warmth hit like a wall when they walked through the door. A waitress with tired eyes and graying hair looked up from wiping down the counter, clocked Adrian's expensive coat and Lena's hospital scrubs, and gestured toward a booth in the back. "Coffee?" she asked as they sat down. "Water first," Adrian said before Lena could respond. "Then coffee if she wants it, and 2 of whatever your actual food is, not just breakfast sides." The waitress, her name tag said Deb, raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. "Meatloaf, okay? Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans." Adrian looked at Lena. She nodded, too overwhelmed to have preferences. 2 meatloaf platters, Adrian confirmed. "And keep the water coming." Deb left. Lena stared at the table. Formica, old but clean, the kind of surface that had absorbed decades of spilled coffee and late-night confessions. Her hands lay flat against it, and she couldn't help but notice how they looked next to Adrian's when he set his phone down. Hers chapped and raw from constant hand-washing, nails bitten short, a bandage around her left index finger where an IV needle had gone rogue yesterday. His pristine controlled everything in its place. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Whatever this is. The rescue thing. I'm fine." "You've upgraded from 'I'm fine' to 'I'm fine, but I appreciate the gesture'?" There was something almost teasing in his tone. "That's progress." Despite everything, Lena felt her mouth twitch, almost a smile. It felt strange on her face, like an expression she'd forgotten how to make. Deb returned with 2 enormous glasses of water and a pot of coffee. Lena reached for the water and drank half of it in one continuous pull. Her stomach cramped slightly, too much too fast, but she didn't care. She hadn't realized how dehydrated she was until cold water hit her system and her body lit up with relief. "Slow down," Adrian said. Not a command, just a suggestion. "You'll make yourself sick." Medical advice from someone who's not a doctor? Common sense from someone who's seen what happens when people who've been running on empty try to fix everything at once. Lena set the glass down and met his eyes. "And you've seen that how exactly? You make a habit of picking up half-dead nurses from subway platforms?" "No." Adrian leaned back against the booth, and for the first time since catching her, he looked almost relaxed. "But I've been in situations where I had to make choices about who to trust with very little information. I've learned to read people quickly." "And what do you read about me?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with the kind of defensiveness that rose up whenever anyone looked too close. But Adrian didn't flinch. "I read someone who's been surviving on scraps for so long that the idea of a full meal feels dangerous," he said quietly. "Someone who apologizes for taking up space. Someone who's forgotten that wanting things isn't a character flaw." Lena's throat tightened. She looked away, out at the window at the empty street, anywhere but at those gray eyes that saw too much. "You don't know anything about me." "No," Adrian agreed. "I don't. But I know what I saw on that platform. And I know those bruises didn't come from a fall." Silence dropped between them like a guillotine. Lena's pulse hammered in her ears. This was it. The moment where she was supposed to make excuses, laugh it off, explain that she was clumsy or careless or any of the other lies she'd told doctors and coworkers, and anyone who got close enough to see the truth. But she was so tired of lying. "It's not your business," she said instead. "You're right. It's not." Deb arrived with 2 plates piled high with actual food. Meatloaf that smelled like comfort and nostalgia, mashed potatoes drowning in gravy, green beans that looked like they'd been cooked with actual butter instead of steamed into flavorless submission. She set them down along with silverware and extra napkins and left without comment. Lena stared at her plate. When was the last time someone had put food in front of her without expecting something in return? When was the last time she'd eaten something that wasn't a granola bar or vending machine crackers or whatever she could grab between patients? "Eat," Adrian said simply. He picked up his own fork, apparently content to let the subject of bruises drop. She ate. The first bite of mashed potatoes nearly made her cry. The second bite steadied her. By the third, she was eating with the single-minded focus of someone whose body had finally convinced their brain that yes, this was actually happening. Yes, they were actually allowed to have this. Adrian ate too, but slower, watching her with peripheral attention that felt less invasive than direct staring. They didn't talk. For several minutes, the only sounds were silverware on plates, and the low murmur of other diners' conversations, and the hiss of the grill from the kitchen. Lena made it through half the meatloaf before her stomach started sending signals that any more would be pushing it. She set down her fork and reached for the water again, sipping more carefully this time. "Better?" Adrian asked. Yeah, she was. The spots in her vision were gone. The trembling in her hands had steadied. She was warm and full, and for the first time in 16 hours, not in immediate danger of collapsing. "Thank you." "You're welcome." "I should probably—" Lena glanced at her phone. 12:47 a.m. 13. New texts from Ethan, each one more aggressive than the last. Her stomach clenched again, this time having nothing to do with food. "I should go home." Adrian followed her gaze to the phone. She saw him read the tension in her face, put together pieces she hadn't said out loud. "Do you want to go home?" he asked. Want doesn't really factor into it. That's not an answer. Lena looked at him, really looked, taking in the careful way he held himself. The expensive clothes that somehow didn't make him seem soft. The eyes that had probably seen violence and decided not to blink. "Who are you?" she asked. "Really? Because you're not just some guy who happened to catch a stranger on a subway platform." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, "My name is Adrian Valenti. I run a private security firm. We handle high-risk situations for people who need protection they can't get through conventional channels." Security. Lena let the word roll around in her mouth. It was both more and less than she'd expected. "Like bodyguards?" "Among other things." "And you're telling me this because?" "Because you asked, and because I don't lie to people I'm trying to help." "You're trying to help me?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you need it, because I can, because—" He stopped, something shifting behind his eyes. "Because once upon a time, someone helped me when I had no reason to expect it and every reason to refuse. I've been paying that forward ever since." Lena's phone buzzed again. She didn't look at it. Couldn't. If she looked, she'd see Ethan's name, and if she saw his name, she'd remember what waited at home. And if she remembered that, she'd lose whatever fragile courage was building in her chest. "If I don't go home," she said slowly, "he'll get angrier. It'll be worse tomorrow." "Will it?" Adrian's voice was quiet. "Or will it just be different?" "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe it's already as bad as it can get, and the only thing keeping you there is the fear that leaving might somehow make it worse." He paused. "But from where I'm sitting, I don't see how it could be much worse than bruises you have to hide and a collapse on a subway platform because you're too afraid to eat your own food at home." Lena opened her mouth to argue, to defend, to explain that Adrian didn't understand, couldn't understand, that leaving wasn't as simple as just walking away. But the words dried up in her throat, because he was right. It was already bad, had been bad for months. And every day she stayed, every excuse she made, every lie she told herself about how it would get better, or how she deserved it, or how she just needed to be smarter, quieter, smaller, all of it was just another way of choosing the nightmare she knew over the uncertainty she didn't. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she whispered. Adrian pulled out his phone, typed something, waited. A response came back almost immediately. "I have an apartment in Tribeca that I keep for situations that require discretion. It's empty right now. Full kitchen, clean sheets, security system that would make Fort Knox jealous." He looked up from the phone. "You can stay there tonight. Tomorrow, if you want. We can discuss options. If you don't want my help beyond a safe place to sleep, that's fine too. But either way, you don't have to go back to wherever those bruises came from. Not tonight." Lena's heart hammered. This was insane. She didn't know this man. Didn't know if his offer was genuine or just another trap wearing a more expensive suit than the last one. But she did know what would happen if she got on that train to Washington Heights. She knew Ethan would be waiting, would be drunk and angry and looking for someone to punish for the universe's cruelties. Would see her late arrival as confirmation of whatever paranoid fantasy he'd constructed while she was saving lives at Mount Sinai. She knew exactly how that would go. Okay, Lena heard herself say. Okay, just for tonight. Adrian nodded once, the gesture somehow managing to convey both agreement and a promise. He signaled Deb for the check, left cash on the table that was probably triple what the meal cost, and stood. Lena stood too. Her legs were steadier now, her vision clear, her body remembering how to function on actual food and water. But her hands shook slightly as she gathered her backpack, and when Adrian held the door open for her, she had to take a breath before stepping through. The car was still there, Marcus waiting patiently by the rear door as if people made strange detours in the middle of the night all the time. Maybe in Adrian's world, they did. Tribeca apartment, Adrian said as they got in. The secure one. Understood. The drive took 20 minutes, cutting down through Manhattan as the city gradually shifted from working-class neighborhoods to glass towers and carefully maintained streets. Lena watched it all pass in silence, her phone a heavy weight in her pocket. She'd turned off the vibration alerts. Whatever Ethan was saying, she didn't want to know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. They pulled up in front of a building that screamed money in the quietest possible way. Understated entrance, doorman who nodded at Adrian without surprise, lobby that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about modern luxury. Ms. Carter will be staying in 12B, Adrian told the doorman. Indefinitely. Please add her to the approved guest list and make sure she has access to anything she needs. The doorman, nameplate reading James, barely blinked. Of course, Mr. Valenti. Welcome, Ms. Carter. The elevator was all glass and steel and the kind of mechanical precision that suggested regular maintenance by people who actually cared. It rose silently, numbers ticking upward, Lena's stomach doing complicated things that had nothing to do with motion sickness. 12th floor. The doors open onto a hallway that was almost aggressively tasteful, neutral colors, original art on the walls, lighting designed to make people look good instead of just illuminated. Adrian led her to the second door on the left and pulled out a key card. The lock beeped, clicked. The door swung open onto an apartment that made Lena's studio in Washington Heights look like a closet. Open floor plan. Kitchen with actual counter space and appliances that looked unused. Living room with furniture that was clearly expensive but somehow not uncomfortable. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing a view of the city that probably cost more per square foot than most people's annual salaries. Bedrooms through there, Adrian said, gesturing to a hallway. Bathrooms attached, clean towels in the closet, toiletries under the sink, kitchen stocked with basics. Help yourself to anything. I'll have someone bring over some clothes tomorrow if you need them. Lena stood in the middle of all this luxury and felt completely out of place, like a street cat someone had brought inside, dragging in dirt and damage and all the wrong kinds of survival skills. This is too much, she said. It's a safe place to sleep. That's not too much. That's the minimum. I can't pay you. I didn't ask you to. Then what do you want? The question came out sharp, defensive. People don't do things like this without wanting something. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he walked to this kitchen island, pulled out a business card, and wrote something on the back before setting it on the counter. My direct number. You can reach me 24 hours a day. If you need anything, food, clothes, help with whatever situation you're trying to leave, call me. He paused. What I want is for you to be safe. That's it. No debt, no obligation. Just a chance to sleep without being afraid. He moved toward the door, and Lena felt something like panic flutter in her chest. Wait, she said. What if... She stopped, not sure how to articulate the dozens of worst-case scenarios running through her head. What if he finds you? Adrian finished. He won't. This building has the kind of security that most people can't bypass. But if you're worried, there's a panic button by the bed that connects directly to my phone and to building security. Press it, and someone will be here in under 2 minutes. You've done this before. Helped people leave bad situations? Yes. Why? Adrian's expression shifted into something that might have been memory, might have been regret. Because I know what it's like to believe you don't have choices, and I know what it means when someone shows you that you do. He left before she could ask anything else, the door closing with a soft click that somehow sounded final. Lena stood in the middle of the silent apartment and tried to process everything that had happened in the last hour. Collapsing on a subway platform, being caught by a stranger with storm-gray eyes, food, warmth, An offer of safety that felt too good to be real. Her phone buzzed again. 22 messages now. She pulled it out, looked at Ethan's name on the screen, and felt something shift in her chest. She powered it off. Not temporary. Not just for tonight. She held down the button until the screen went black. Until Ethan's digital voice was silenced. Until the leash he'd kept around her throat through texts and calls and constant monitoring finally went slack. Then she walked to the windows and looked out at Manhattan spread before her like a promise she didn't quite believe yet. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably destroying their apartment, working himself into a rage, planning what he'd do when she came home. But she wasn't coming home. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Lena pressed her forehead against the cool glass and let herself cry for the first time in 8 months. Not quiet tears. Not hidden tears. Full, body-shaking sobs that emptied out some of the fear and exhaustion and desperate, clinging hope that maybe, just maybe, this was real. That maybe being caught when you fell wasn't just something that happened in stories. That maybe, sometimes, strangers with storm gray eyes meant exactly what they said. Lena woke to sunlight she didn't recognize. Not the anemic gray that filtered through her apartment's single north-facing window, always diluted by the building across the alley. This was actual sunlight, golden, warm, pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows like the city had decided to be generous for once. For 3 confused seconds, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The platform, Adrian's hands catching her, the diner, the choice she'd made in the early hours of the morning to not go home. Her phone sat on the nightstand, still powered off. She stared at it like it might explode. The bedroom was pristine in daylight. White sheets that probably cost more than her weekly paycheck, furniture that looked like it came from one of those stores where they didn't put price tags because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. Through the open door, she could see into the living room, unchanged from last night except for the way morning light transformed everything from elegant to almost accusatory. What the hell had she done? Lena sat up slowly, cataloging her body's complaints. The bone-deep exhaustion had eased slightly, but everything else remained. Bruises on her ribs that protested when she breathed too deeply. The tender spot on her cheekbone where Ethan's ring had caught her. Muscles that ached from 16-hour shifts and the constant tension of living afraid. The clock on the nightstand read 9:47 a.m. She'd slept for nearly 9 hours. When was the last time that had happened? Her backpack sat on the chair where she'd dropped it last night. Inside, her scrubs, already starting to smell like hospital and sweat. 3 granola bars. A paperback with a cracked spine. Her wallet with its nearly empty checking account and ID that still listed an address she could never return to. Everything she owned, fitting in one bag. The thought should have been depressing. Instead, it felt almost liberating. Nothing tying her down. Nothing she couldn't walk away from. Except she'd already walked away, hadn't she? The moment she'd gotten in Adrian's car instead of on that train, she'd made a choice that couldn't be unmade. Lena's stomach growled, interrupting her spiral. Right. Food. Adrian had said the kitchen was stocked. She patted out in the oversized t-shirt she'd found in the bathroom closet last night. Men's, probably Adrian's, smelling faintly of that expensive cologne, and opened the refrigerator. Stocked was an understatement. Fresh vegetables. Real eggs. Butter. Milk that hadn't expired. Cheese that came in actual blocks instead of pre-shredded bags. The freezer held quality cuts of meat, frozen berries, the kind of ice cream that came in pints with minimalist labels. Lena stared at it all and felt something crack in her chest. When was the last time she'd opened a refrigerator and had actual choices? When had she last made breakfast without calculating exactly how much each ingredient cost, whether she could afford to use butter or if margarine would have to do? She made scrambled eggs with cheese, toast with real butter, poured herself orange juice that tasted like someone had actually squeezed oranges instead of reconstituting powder, sat at the kitchen island in borrowed clothes in a borrowed apartment and ate food she hadn't paid for and tried not to feel like an imposter. The business card Adrian had left sat where he'd placed it. White, expensive cardstock. Valenti Security Solutions in understated black letters. A phone number. And on the back, in handwriting that was surprisingly neat, his direct line, like he'd promised. Lena picked it up, turned it over in her fingers. She should call him, should thank him properly for last night, for this. Should probably ask what happened next because she had no plan beyond don't go back to Ethan, and that wasn't much of a strategy. Before she could talk herself out of it, she powered on her phone. The screen lit up, and immediately notifications started flooding in. Texts, missed calls, voicemails. The numbers kept climbing. 37 texts, 15 missed calls, 8 voicemails, all from Ethan. Lena's hands shook as she opened the messages. She shouldn't look, knew she shouldn't, but some masochistic part of her needed to see what she'd escaped. The first few texts were almost normal. Where are you? Your shift ended at 11:30. Answer me. Then they escalated. Accusations of cheating, demands that she come home immediately, threats about what would happen when she did. By 2 a.m., he'd shifted to apologies. He was sorry. He didn't mean it. He was just worried. She knew how he got when he was worried. By 4 a.m., the threats came back, darker this time. He knew she was with someone. She'd pay for this. Did she think she could just disappear? The last text, sent at 7:23 this morning. I know you'll come back. You always do, because you got nowhere else to go. Lena set the phone down before she could read the voicemails. Her appetite vanished. The eggs sat in her stomach like concrete. He was right, wasn't he? She had nowhere else to go. This apartment was temporary. Adrian's help was temporary. Eventually, she'd have to face reality. No savings, no family, no friends she hadn't systematically pushed away because Ethan got jealous every time she mentioned another person's name. Her phone rang. Not Ethan. A number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Carter? Male voice, professional, unfamiliar. Yes? This is James from the front desk. I apologize for the interruption, but there's a gentleman here asking for you. An Ethan Morris. He's quite insistent that you're staying in the building. Lena's blood turned to ice. What? He doesn't have clearance to come up, of course, and I've informed him that I can't confirm or deny any resident or guest information. But he's refusing to leave. I wanted to alert you before I call the police. How? Lena's voice came out strangled. How did he find me? I couldn't say, ma'am. Would you like me to have him removed from the premises? Yes, please, and she thought fast. Don't tell him anything. Don't confirm I'm here. Tell him he's mistaken. Understood. I'll handle it discreetly. The line went dead. Lena sat frozen at the kitchen island, panic clawing at her throat. How had Ethan found her? She hadn't told anyone where she was. Hadn't even known herself until last night. Had he followed her? Been watching the platform? Tracked her phone somehow? Her phone, of course. The Life of 360 app he'd insisted she install 6 months ago, claiming it was for safety. She'd forgotten about it, stopped thinking about the ways he monitored her every movement. With shaking hands, Lena opened the app and deleted it. Then she went through every other app, every permission, deleting anything that could track her location. Should have done this immediately. Should have thought of it last night. But she'd been so tired, so desperate for one night of safety that she hadn't thought about covering her digital tracks. A knock at the door made her jump so hard she nearly fell off the stool. Ms. Carter, it's James from downstairs. I have something for you. Lena approached the door like it might bite, checked the peephole, saw the doorman she'd met last night, alone, holding a small package. She opened the door a crack, chain still engaged. I'm sorry to disturb you again, James said, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes kind. Mr. Morris has been escorted off the property. Building security has his photo now and he won't be allowed back. Mr. Valenti also called. He's on his way up. He called you? The panic alert in this apartment is connected to multiple contact points. When I notified Mr. Valenti about the situation downstairs, he indicated he'd handle it personally. James held up the package. He also had me bring these up, said you might need them. Lena took the package, surprisingly heavy, and mumbled thanks. James nodded and left. She closed the door, engaged all 3 locks, and leaned against it. The package contained a new phone, top of the line, still in its box. A note in Adrian's handwriting. Untraceable. New number. Your old phone is compromised. A. How had he known? How had he moved so fast? Another knock. Lena checked the peephole again and saw Adrian, dressed more casually than last night. Dark jeans, black sweater, leather jacket that probably cost more than her car had. Still expensive, but less obviously so. She opened the door. Adrian's eyes went straight to her face, cataloging. You okay? How did you know? About Ethan? About the phone? James called me when someone showed up claiming to know you. Given the circumstances of last night, I made an educated guess. He stepped inside and Lena noticed he moved like someone used to assessing spaces for threats. May I? She nodded, still clutching the new phone. Adrian walked to the windows, looked out at the street below. He's gone. Building security walked him 2 blocks away and made it clear that returning would result in arrest for trespassing. We also contacted NYPD about the harassment. You can't. He'll just get angrier. You don't know him. You're right. I don't. Adrian turned to face her. But I know his type, and I know that men like him rely on their victims believing they're powerless. The moment you stop believing that, the dynamic shifts. You don't understand. He'll find me. He always... Not here. Adrian's voice was flat, certain. This building has security measures most people don't even know exist. Facial recognition tied to a blacklist database. Biometric access controls. 24-hour monitoring. He can't get to you here. Lena wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that concrete and cameras and door locks could keep her safe. But 8 months with Ethan had taught her that walls were just suggestions, that locked doors meant nothing when someone was determined enough. He knows I'm here, she said. He tracked my phone somehow. He'll wait. He'll watch. He'll figure out when I leave, and then don't leave. Not yet. Adrian moved to the kitchen, started making coffee like this was his apartment instead of hers. Or not hers. She didn't know what to call this space. Give it a few days. Let me handle the situation. Handle it how? Legal channels, primarily. Restraining order, documentation of harassment. I have lawyers on retainer who specialize in domestic violence cases. They're very good at what they do. I can't afford lawyers. Adrian poured 2 cups of coffee, added cream to both without asking. Somehow he'd guessed she took it light. I'm not asking you to. You can't just... Lena struggled for words. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. I'm nobody. You're someone who needed help. Adrian handed her a mug. That's enough. They stood in the kitchen drinking coffee while Manhattan woke up 12 floors below. Lena's mind raced through possibilities, consequences, all the ways this could go wrong. Adrian seemed content with silence, not pushing, just present. Finally, she asked the question that had been gnawing at her since last night. What happened to you? You said someone helped you once. What did you mean? Adrian was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, I was 17. Involved with people who made their money in ways that didn't show up on tax returns. I thought I was smart, thought I was tough, thought the world worked in simple categories of strong and weak. He stared into his coffee. Then I made a mistake that should have gotten me killed. Someone intervened, got me out, gave me a choice about what kind of person I wanted to be. What did you choose? To be someone who intervenes. He looked up, met her eyes. I built my company on that principle. We protect people who can't protect themselves through conventional means. Sometimes that's executives with stalkers. Sometimes it's witnesses who need to disappear. Sometimes, he gestured around the apartment, sometimes it's nurses who collapse on subway platforms because they're too afraid to go home. I'm not your responsibility. No, Adrian agreed. You're your own responsibility. I'm just offering resources. Lena's phone, her old phone, buzzed on the counter. Another text from Ethan. She didn't look at it. I have to go to work, she said. My shift starts at 3. Call in sick. I can't afford... Yes, you can. You can afford one day to figure out your next move without worrying about him ambushing you outside the hospital. He was right. Lena knew he was right. But calling in sick meant losing a day's pay, and she was already behind on bills, already drowning in debt she couldn't pay, already one emergency away from complete financial collapse. Adrian seemed to read her thoughts. How much do you make in a shift? That's not... Humor me. After taxes? Maybe $200. Why? Adrian pulled out his wallet and counted out cash. $400? Set it on the counter. That's 2 shifts. Take today and tomorrow off. Let your body recover. Let me handle the legal situation. Monday. You can go back to work with a restraining order in place and security protocols established. Lena stared at the money. I can't take that. You already did. It's sitting on the counter. This isn't... People don't just give other people money. I'm not people. I'm someone who can afford to give you $400 without missing it, and you're someone who needs it badly enough that pride shouldn't be the thing that stops you from accepting it. The brutal honesty of it cut through her protests. He was right. She needed it, needed the time, needed the help, needed someone to take some of the weight she'd been carrying alone for so long. Why aren't you afraid I'll just take your money and disappear? She asked. Adrian smiled, the expression transforming his face into something almost warm. Because you're not that kind of person. And because if you did, I'd consider it $400 well spent to help someone escape a bad situation. Lena picked up the cash, folded it carefully, set it back down. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Accept help. Trust people. Believe that someone would help me without wanting something in return. That's okay. Adrian finished his coffee, rinsed the cup. You don't have to know how. You just have to let it happen. He left shortly after, promising to send updates about the legal proceedings. Lena stood in the apartment and tried to process the last 12 hours. Yesterday morning, she'd been trapped in a life she hated with no way out. Now she was standing in a Tribeca apartment drinking good coffee with $400 on the counter and a stranger's promise of protection. It felt like a fever dream, like something that would evaporate the moment she blinked too hard. But the coffee was real. The money was real. The bruises on her ribs were real. And somewhere in the city, Ethan was probably destroying what was left of their apartment, working himself into a rage that would eventually need an outlet. But he couldn't reach her here. For the first time in 8 months, Lena was behind walls he couldn't breach. She picked up the new phone, still in its box, started the setup process. New number, new device, new possibility of a life where she didn't have to track her every word, every movement, every breath to avoid setting off someone else's anger. The phone asked for a passcode. Lena thought for a moment, then entered 6 digits. The date she'd left. November 27th, the day she'd chosen to fall forward instead of backward. A text came through on her old phone. She glanced at it, saw Ethan's name, and made a decision. She opened the window, looked down at the street 12 floors below, and dropped the old phone. Watched it fall, tumbling through the air, until it shattered on the pavement in a small explosion of glass and plastic. Then she closed the window and smiled. 3 days passed in a strange suspension of reality. Adrian sent updates. Restraining order filed, evidence of harassment documented, Ethan contacted by NYPD and warned that further contact would result in arrest. Lena stayed in the apartment, learning its rhythms, teaching herself to sleep without jumping at every sound. On the 4th day, she went back to work. Marcus drove her, Adrian's idea, non-negotiable according to the text she'd received. The town car pulled up to Mount Sinai's staff entrance at 2:45 p.m., and Lena felt like she was arriving at her own job in disguise. I'll be here when your shift ends, Marcus said. Not a question. You don't have to... Mister. Valenti was quite clear about the arrangements. Lena gave up arguing. She was learning that Adrian didn't make suggestions. He made decisions and then implemented them with the kind of efficiency that made resistance feel pointless. The ER was chaos, as always. 3 stab wounds, 2 overdoses, a construction worker with a crushed hand, and somewhere in Bay 6, a woman screaming about demons. Normal Tuesday afternoon in Manhattan. Carter! Her supervisor, Linda, appeared with a clipboard. You're back. Feeling better? Yeah, thanks for covering my shift. Next time, more than 2 hours' notice would be great. Linda's tone was sharp, but not cruel. We're short-staffed enough without people calling in sick at the last minute. I know. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. It was easier to apologize than explain that she'd been fleeing domestic violence and hiding in a luxury apartment while lawyers filed restraining orders. Easier to be the flaky nurse who called in sick than the victim who'd finally run. The shift blurred together in the usual way. IVs and vital signs and charting and the particular kind of exhaustion that came from caring for people who were at their worst. Around hour 5, Lena was updating a patient's chart when she felt eyes on her. She looked up. Ethan stood in the waiting room. Her breath stopped. He wasn't supposed to be here. The restraining order explicitly prohibited contact, but there he was, 40 feet away, staring at her through the glass partition with an expression that promised consequences. Lena's hands shook. The pen slipped from her fingers. One of the other nurses, Jennifer, young and oblivious, followed her gaze. "You know that guy? He's been hanging around for like an hour. Security almost kicked him out, but he said he was waiting for a friend." "Call security," Lena managed. "Now." Jennifer's eyes widened. "Shit, is he—" "Now." Jennifer grabbed the phone. Lena didn't move, couldn't move, trapped in Ethan's stare like a rabbit watching a wolf decide whether to pounce. She saw the moment he realized she'd called for help, saw his expression shift from possessive to predatory. He started walking toward the ER entrance. Security got there first. 2 guards, both bigger than Ethan, intercepting him before he could reach the doors. Lena couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Ethan's body language shift from aggressive to defensive, saw him pull out his phone like he was recording the interaction, saw security escorting him firmly toward the exit. He looked back once, caught her eye, mouthed something that might have been, "This isn't over." Then he was gone. Lena stood frozen until Linda appeared at her elbow. "You okay?" "I have a restraining order against him." "The guy security just removed?" "Yes." Linda's expression hardened. "Come with me." They went to Linda's office, cramped, overflowing with paperwork, smelling like old coffee and stress. Linda pulled out a form. "Hospital policy. Anyone with a restraining order against them gets flagged in our system. Security will have his photo. If he shows up again, they'll call NYPD immediately." She slid the form across the desk. "Fill this out. And Carter, I need to know you're safe. Because if you're not, if this escalates, it becomes a workplace safety issue." "I'm safe." Lena filled out the form with shaking hands. "I have somewhere secure to stay. It's handled." "Is it?" Linda's skepticism was clear. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like it's just getting started." She wasn't wrong. Lena finished the shift in a fog of adrenaline and fear, jumping at every sound, scanning every face for Ethan's features. Marcus picked her up at 11:30, and she collapsed into the town car's leather seats like a puppet with cut strings. "Problem?" Marcus asked, reading her face in the rearview mirror. "He was there, at the hospital, waiting for me." Marcus pulled out his phone, sent a text. 30 seconds later, Lena's new phone buzzed. "Adrian. Get her home safe. I'm handling it." Lena wanted to ask what handling it meant, but exhaustion swallowed the question. She dozed in the car, woke when they pulled up to the Tribeca building, trudged to the elevator in a haze. Adrian was waiting in the apartment. He looked up from his laptop when she entered, took one look at her face and closed the computer. "Tell me what happened." Lena told him. Every detail. The waiting room stare, security's intervention, Linda's forms, the constant awareness that Ethan was watching, waiting, planning his next move. When she finished, Adrian was quiet for a long moment, then, "This ends tomorrow." "You can't promise that." "Watch me." He pulled out his phone, made a call. "Leo, I need you to run a comprehensive background on Ethan Morris. Everything. Criminal history, financial records, employment, known associates. I want to know every parking ticket, every bad check, every complaint filed against him." A pause. "By morning. Yes, I know what time it is. Bill it accordingly." He hung up and looked at Lena. Men like Ethan don't live clean lives. They think they're untouchable because their victims are too afraid to fight back. But fear only works when it's the only option. "What are you going to do?" "Give you options." Adrian opened his laptop again, started typing. "By tomorrow, we'll know everything about him. And then we're going to make it very clear that stalking you comes with consequences he can't afford." Lena should have been disturbed by the cold calculation in his voice, should have questioned the ethics of running background checks, of using information as a weapon, of fighting dirty against someone who'd taught her what dirty fighting really meant. But all she felt was relief. Someone was on her side. Someone with resources and connections and the kind of quiet ruthlessness that came from surviving something dark enough to leave scars. "I should pay you," she said, "for all this. The apartment, the lawyers, No. Adrian, no." He looked up from the laptop. "I told you, no debt, no obligation. This is what I do. For everyone? For people who need it. That's not an answer. Adrian closed the laptop again, leaned back in the chair. You want the truth? Most of my clients are wealthy, executives, celebrities, people who can afford top-tier security. But I built this company on the memory of being 17 and powerless. So once a month, I take a case pro bono, someone who needs help but can't pay for it. You're this month's case. I'm a case. You're a person who deserves to feel safe in her own life. The paperwork calls it a case. I call it basic human decency. Lena sat down across from him. What if I want to pay you back anyway? When I can afford it? Then donate to a women's shelter. Or help the next person who's where you are now. Pay it forward, not back. It was the same thing he'd said at the diner. The same philosophy that apparently drove everything he did. Lena studied his face, trying to understand what made someone choose to live like this. Always helping, always intervening, always standing between people and the violence that wanted to consume them. Who helped you? She asked. When you were 17, who intervened? Adrian's expression shifted into something complicated. Her name was Marie. She ran a community center in the Bronx. I showed up bleeding one night, and she didn't ask questions. Just stitched me up, gave me a meal, told me I had potential I was wasting on people who'd get me killed. He paused. She died 6 years ago. Cancer. I never got to thank her properly. Is that why you do this? Part of it. Adrian stood, walked to the windows. The other part is selfish. Helping people gives me purpose. Makes me feel like the shit I went through when I was younger wasn't pointless. Lena joined him at the windows. Below, the city glittered with a million individual stories, people loving and fighting and surviving and breaking. She wondered how many of them were standing in apartments they didn't own, accepting help from strangers, trying to believe in the possibility of safety. Thank you, she said quietly. You don't have to eat. Yes, I do. You saved my life. Maybe not literally, but close enough. She met his eyes. So thank you. Adrian nodded. Something passed between them, understanding maybe, or recognition. Two people who'd learned that survival sometimes required accepting help you hadn't earned and didn't deserve. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He left, and Lena was alone again in the borrowed apartment with its expensive furniture and its promise of safety. She showered, changed into the clothes Adrian had sent over, simple, well-made, fitting her better than anything she'd owned in years, and climbed into bed. Sleep came easier than she expected. And for the first time in 8 months, she didn't dream about locked doors and fists and the particular sound Ethan's voice made right before he decided she needed to be taught a lesson. She dreamed about subway platforms and hands catching her before she fell. The courthouse steps felt like walking up to a gallows. Lena's heels clicked against marble that had seen 1,000 verdicts, 1,000 lives split open and reassembled under fluorescent lights, and the weight of justice that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. 3 months had passed since Adrian's lawyers had filed the restraining order. 3 months since the district attorney's office had agreed to press charges based on the hospital records Lena had finally, shakily, requested from Mount Sinai. 3 months of depositions and motions and legal terminology that felt like learning a new language while someone held your head underwater. 3 months of safety that still felt temporary. You don't have to do this, Adrian said beside her. He'd taken the morning off, rearranged meetings, delegated responsibilities, shown up at the Tribeca apartment at 7 a.m. with coffee and the kind of steady presence that had become as familiar as breathing. We can request a postponement, push it back, give you more time. Lena adjusted the blazer he'd had tailored for her last week. Navy blue, conservative, the uniform of someone who deserved to be believed. She barely recognized herself in courthouse bathroom mirrors. Hair pulled back, minimal makeup covering skin that had finally started to look healthy again, posture that no longer defaulted to making herself smaller. More time won't make it easier, she said. It'll just give me more opportunities to talk myself out of it. That's what I'm worried about. She looked at him. In the morning light, Adrian's face was all sharp angles and controlled concern. He'd been careful with her these past months, never pushing, never assuming, maintaining exactly the distance she needed until she closed it herself. The apartment had become hers in increments, her clothes in the closet, her books on the shelves, her presence in rooms that had been empty before she'd filled them with the messy reality of learning to live instead of just survive. They hadn't talked about what happened after the trial, hadn't discussed whether she'd stay or go or what shape their relationship would take once the crisis that had brought them together resolved itself. Some conversations required solid ground, and Lena was still learning to trust that the floor wouldn't collapse beneath her feet. "I have to do this," she said, "not because the lawyers say I should or because it helps the DA's case, because I need to look at him and not be afraid anymore." Adrian nodded. He understood about needing to face things head on, had his own scars, his own history of violence that he'd alluded to in conversations late at night when neither of them could sleep. They'd formed a strange kinship, she and this man who'd caught her when she fell, both of them carrying damage, both of them trying to figure out how to set it down instead of letting it define every choice they made. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. Television had lied about that, like it lied about most things. No dramatic wooden panels, no soaring ceilings, just industrial carpet and fluorescent lighting and rows of benches that looked like they'd been ordered from the same catalog as high school auditorium seating. Ethan sat at the defendant's table with his public defender, a young woman who looked exhausted in the specific way lawyers handling too many cases for too little pay always did. He'd lost weight in county lockup. His hair was shorter, his orange jumpsuit a harsh contrast against skin that hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. When Lena walked in, his head snapped up and their eyes met across 20 feet of empty space. She didn't look away. That was the first victory. The first small, shaking claim to the power he'd spent 8 months stripping away piece by piece. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Reeves, who'd made it clear she'd seen cases like this before and knew exactly how they usually ended, gestured for Lena to sit in the front row. Adrian settled beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence without him actually touching her, a reminder that she wasn't alone, that whatever happened in the next few hours, someone would be there to catch her if she fell again. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The machinery of justice ground forward with its rituals and formalities, and Lena tried to focus on breathing in a steady rhythm that wouldn't betray how badly her hands wanted to shake. The people called Lena Marie Carter to the stand. Standing felt like an act of rebellion. Walking to the witness box felt like every nightmare she'd had for 3 months, condensed into 20 seconds of marble floors and watching eyes, and Ethan's face tracking her movement with an expression that promised consequences she was no longer around to receive. The bailiff swore her in. Lena put her hand on a Bible she didn't believe in and promised to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. As if truth was ever that simple. As if you could separate it cleanly from fear and shame and all the complicated reasons people stayed in situations that were killing them slowly. Patricia Reeves approached with a legal pad and a pen she didn't need. This was theater, Lena understood now. Performance designed to convince 12 strangers that what had happened to her mattered enough to punish. "Ms. Carter, can you tell the court how you met the defendant?" Lena's mouth was dry. She reached for the water glass someone had thoughtfully placed on the witness stand, took a sip, bought herself 5 seconds to remember the breathing exercises Adrian's security consultant had taught her. "We met at a bar in Queens 2 years ago. I was there with coworkers after a shift. He bought me a drink." "And you began a relationship?" "Yes. We dated for about 14 months before he asked me to move in with him." "When did the abuse start?" Lena had known this question was coming, had rehearsed her answer with Patricia a dozen times. But sitting in this box with Ethan 10 feet away and a courtroom full of people waiting to judge whether her pain was legitimate enough to prosecute, the words felt inadequate. "About 3 months after I moved in. Small things at first. He'd get angry if I was late coming home from work, accuse me of seeing other people, check my phone, my texts, ask where I'd been in a way that felt like interrogation." She paused. "Then one night I contradicted him in front of his friends, told them a story differently than how he'd told it. When they left, he hit me for the first time." "Can you describe that incident?" This was the part Lena had dreaded. The clinical recitation of violence packaged for consumption by people who'd never felt a fist connect with their face, never learned to read moods and predict explosions, never understood that sometimes love and terror lived in the same space and it took months to untangle which was which. "He punched me in the stomach, said I'd embarrassed him, that I needed to learn when to keep my mouth shut." The words came out flat, effectless. She'd practiced that too. The emotional distance that made testimony believable instead of hysterical. After that, it happened more often. If I was late from work, if dinner wasn't ready, if I looked at him wrong or forgot to buy his beer, or just existed in a way that reminded him he was angry about something. Did you seek help? I went to the ER twice, told them I'd fallen, walked into a door, the usual lies. Lena met Patricia's eyes. I know how it sounds. I'm a nurse. I see domestic violence victims all the time. I should have known better. But knowing something intellectually and being able to act on it when you're afraid for your life are two different things. Patricia nodded. Let's talk about the night of August 17th. Can you describe what happened? August 17th. The night everything had splintered apart. Lena took another sip of water and let herself remember what she'd spent 3 months trying to forget. I worked a double shift, 16 hours. I was exhausted and hungry, and I knew Ethan would be angry that I was late, but I couldn't afford to turn down the overtime. She glanced at the jury, 7 women, 5 men, faces ranging from sympathetic to skeptical. I stopped at the bodega on my block to buy beer, thought maybe if I came home with his favorite brand, it would be okay. And was it okay? No. He was already drunk, accused me of being late because I was sleeping with someone at the hospital. When I tried to explain about the shift, he grabbed me by the throat and slammed me against the wall. Lena heard someone in the gallery inhale sharply. She didn't look to see who. Couldn't afford to break the fragile composure she'd constructed. He choked me until I almost passed out. Then he let go and I fell. He kicked me twice in the ribs while I was on the floor, told me if I ever disrespected him like that again, he'd kill me. Her voice stayed level, clinical. A nurse reporting symptoms. I believed him. What did you do after that? I waited until he passed out. Then I packed a bag and went to work early. I worked another double the next day. And the day after that, I stopped going home except to grab clothes when I knew he'd be out. I slept in the break room at the hospital, in my car when I had gas money. On the subway sometimes, just riding back and forth because it felt safer than being in the apartment. Why didn't you leave entirely? This was the question everyone asked. The one that assumed leaving was simple, that walking away from violence was just a matter of deciding to do it. Because I didn't have anywhere to go. My apartment was in his name. I'd moved into his place. I had no family, no savings. Every dollar I made went to bills or food, or trying to keep things stable enough that he wouldn't explode. Lena's voice cracked slightly. And because he told me he'd find me if I left, that he'd hurt me worse than he ever had before. I believed that too. Patricia let the silence stretch, let the jury sit with the reality of what trapped actually meant. Ms. Carter, did there come a time when you were able to leave this situation? Yes, the night I collapsed on the subway platform. Lena told them about the 16-hour shift, the hunger, the fear of going home. About falling and being caught by a stranger who'd seen through every lie she'd constructed. About food and warmth and the first safe sleep she'd had in months. She didn't look at Adrian while she talked, but she felt his attention on her like a physical presence. And after that night, did the defendant attempt to contact you? Yes. He called and texted constantly, showed up at my work, threatened my coworkers when they wouldn't tell him where I was. He found out about the restraining order and sent messages through friends saying he'd make me regret embarrassing him like this. Patricia held up a phone. Is this your cell phone, Ms. Carter? Yes. And are these messages from the defendant? Lena looked at the screen Patricia angled toward her. Ethan's words in black and white, stripped of the terror they'd induced when they'd arrived at 2 a.m., at 5 a.m., at every hour of the day and night for weeks. Yes? Can you read message 14 for the court, please? Lena's throat tightened. She knew which one Patricia meant. Had shown it to the DA's office during the first meeting, watched their expressions harden from sympathetic to determined. You fucking bitch! You think you can just leave? Hide behind your rich boyfriend and some piece of paper? I will find you. I will hurt you worse than you can imagine. And when I'm done, everyone will know what a lying whore you are. The words landed in the courtroom like stones. Lena heard the jury shift, saw the judge's expression tighten. Even Ethan's public defender looked uncomfortable. Thank you, Ms. Carter. No further questions. The defense attorney stood. She looked young enough to be fresh out of law school, carrying the weight of an unwinnable case and the ethical obligation to defend it anyway. Lena almost felt sorry for her. "Miss Carter, you testified that you're a nurse, correct?" "Yes." "And in your professional capacity, you've received training on recognizing signs of domestic violence?" "Yes." "So you knew how to seek help. You knew the resources available. You knew you could go to the police at any time." It wasn't a question, but Lena answered anyway. Knowing resources exist and being able to access them when you're afraid for your life are different things. "But you did eventually seek help. From Mr. Valenti." The attorney glanced at Adrian. "A wealthy man who provided you with housing, legal representation, financial support. Isn't it true that you saw an opportunity to improve your situation and took it?" Patricia shot to her feet. "Objection. Counsel is implying the victim is somehow at fault for accepting help." "Sustained. Move on, counselor." The defense attorney shifted tactics. "Ms. Carter, you lived with my client for 8 months after the alleged abuse started. You had opportunities to leave. You chose to stay. Isn't it possible that these incidents you're describing were mutual fights? Arguments between partners that got physical on both sides?" Lena's hands clenched in her lap. This was the narrative she'd known was coming, the implication that she was equally responsible, that violence was somehow negotiable between people who claimed to love each other. "No," she said clearly. "I never hit him, never threatened him, never made him afraid to come home or sleep in his own bed or exist in ways that might trigger an explosion. What happened wasn't mutual. It was him hurting me because he could." "But you have no witnesses to these alleged incidents. No police reports filed at the time, just your word against my clients." "I have hospital records from 2 ER visits. I have photographs of bruises. I have text messages where he threatens me explicitly, and I have—" Lena stopped, took a breath. "I have the fact that I'm sitting here in public, with my name and face attached to this testimony, knowing it will follow me for the rest of my life. Nobody does that for attention or money or any reason except that it happened and they're tired of pretending it didn't." The defense attorney looked like she wanted to object, but couldn't find grounds. She sat down. The judge called for a recess. Lena climbed down from the witness stand on legs that felt like water. Adrian met her at the gallery rail, and this time she let him take her hand. Let herself lean into the solid reality of him for just a moment before she had to pull herself together for whatever came next. "You were incredible," he said quietly. "I feel like I'm going to throw up." "That's normal. Come on, let's get some air." They found a bench outside the courtroom, away from the clusters of lawyers and plaintiffs and defendants all negotiating their own versions of justice. Lena sat and put her head between her knees, breathing through the nausea that had nothing to do with physical illness and everything to do with having just excavated her worst moments for public consumption. Adrian didn't try to fix it, just sat beside her, one hand on her back, steady pressure that said, "I'm here without demanding anything in return." "Do you think they believed me?" Lena asked eventually. "I think you told the truth. That's all you can do." "It doesn't feel like enough." It rarely does. "But it's more than he gave you, more than he deserves." Lena sat up slowly. Down the hall, she could see Ethan being led back into the courtroom, his hands cuffed, his expression the particular kind of angry that used to make her stomach drop with dread. Now it just made her tired. "What happens if he's acquitted?" she asked. "Then we make sure you're safe anyway. Restraining order stays in place. Security stays active. You don't face him alone." "What happens if he's convicted?" "Then he goes to prison, and you get to decide what your life looks like without him in it." The second option felt impossible, like something that happened to other people, in other stories, where justice worked the way it was supposed to, and victims weren't blamed for their own victimization. But 3 months ago, safety had felt impossible too, and eating without fear, and sleeping through the night without startling awake at every sound. All of those impossible things had become routine, one careful day at a time. They went back inside when the bailiff called them. Closing arguments blurred together, Patricia's impassioned summary of the evidence, the defense's half-hearted attempt to create reasonable doubt where none existed. The jury filed out to deliberate. The judge announced they'd reconvene when a verdict was reached. It took 4 hours. Lena spent them in a conference room with Patricia, Adrian, and 2 of Adrian's security people who'd been assigned to her case. They brought sandwiches nobody ate and coffee that went cold in styrofoam cups. Lena tried to read, tried to scroll through her phone, tried to do anything except imagine Ethan walking free and showing up at the hospital, at the apartment, in her life with the same violence he'd wielded before but sharpened by months of resentment. When the bailiff knocked to say the jury had reached a decision, Lena's heart tried to climb out through her throat. The courtroom felt colder this time. Or maybe that was just her body forgetting how to regulate temperature under stress. She sat in the same front row seat and watched 12 people file in, their faces carefully neutral, giving nothing away. The foreman stood, middle-aged man, glasses, the kind of face that belonged to someone's accountant or insurance adjuster. He held a piece of paper that contained Lena's future folded into a single word. On the charge of assault in the second degree, how do you find? Guilty. Lena's breath stopped. On the charge of aggravated harassment, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of stalking, how do you find? Guilty. 3 guilty verdicts. 3 times the jury had decided that what happened to her mattered, that Ethan's violence wasn't excusable, wasn't mutual, wasn't something she'd somehow brought on herself. Behind her, someone was crying softly. Beside her, Adrian's hand found hers and squeezed once. Solid, warm, real. Lena looked at Ethan. He was staring straight ahead, face blank, but she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. The same tell that used to warn her an explosion was coming. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks out. The bailiff led Ethan away. His public defender gathered her files with the resigned efficiency of someone who'd known how this would end from the beginning. Patricia turned to Lena. You did it. This is what justice looks like. Justice looked like exhaustion and relief, and a strange, hollow feeling where fear used to live. Lena nodded because words felt too complicated. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun hit her face like absolution. Spring in New York, the kind of day where the city remembered it could be beautiful instead of just brutal. Adrian had sent Marcus to bring the car around, but Lena stopped him before they could head to the curb. Can we walk? She asked. Adrian studied her face. You sure? I need to move. Need to feel like I'm choosing where I go instead of being moved around by court schedules and verdicts. Okay. Where to? Lena looked down the street, at the city spread out before her in all its chaotic possibility. 3 months ago, she'd had nothing but a backpack and terror. Now she had an apartment she'd started thinking of as home, a job she'd returned to once she'd stopped being afraid Ethan would show up in the ER, and a man who'd caught her when she fell and never once asked for anything except the chance to help her stand. Nowhere in particular, she said, just away from here. They walked. Adrian matched her pace without comment, content to let her set the rhythm and direction. They passed street vendors selling halal food and flowers, office workers on late lunch breaks, tourists studying maps and looking perpetually confused. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that a few blocks away, someone's entire world had just been reordered. I keep waiting for it to feel different, Lena said eventually. What to feel different? Winning, justice, whatever you want to call it. I thought when the verdict came I'd feel, I don't know, free, victorious, something bigger than this weird numbness. Adrian was quiet for a few steps. Justice doesn't erase what happened. It just puts a period on that chapter so you can start writing the next one. Very philosophical for someone who runs a security company. I contain multitudes. Despite everything, Lena smiled. Actual amusement, not the performance of it. That had been happening more lately, moments where she forgot to be scared or sad or angry and just existed in whatever emotion the present moment offered. They ended up at Battery Park, watching the water and the tourists and the ferry boats cutting paths toward Staten Island. Lena sat on a bench that had someone's name engraved on it and tried to imagine what came next. Going back to the apartment that had been temporary but was starting to feel permanent. Returning to work without constantly looking over her shoulder. Building a life that wasn't defined by survival or the threat of violence. Maybe even figuring out what she wanted instead of just what she could tolerate. Thank you, she said. Adrian looked at her. For what? For catching me. For not letting go. For making me believe I was worth saving when I'd forgotten how to believe that myself. You saved yourself, Lena. I just provided a safe place to do it. That's more than most people get. Then most people are being failed by a system that should protect them. Adrian's voice carried an edge of anger that wasn't directed at her. You deserved help. Past tense and present tense. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone. Lena leaned against his shoulder, testing whether the gesture would feel like too much. It didn't. It felt like exactly what it was. Two people who'd formed an imperfect partnership through crisis and were trying to figure out if it could become something else. What happens now? She asked. Sentencing in 2 weeks. After that, the restraining order stays in place. Ethan will be in prison for at least 3 years, possibly 5, depending on the judge. Adrian paused. And you get to decide what you want your life to look like. What if I don't know yet? Then you figure it out. One day at a time. No rush. They sat there until the sun started dropping toward New Jersey, and the air turned cold enough that Lena's jacket stopped being adequate. Adrian called Marcus. The car appeared with its usual quiet efficiency. They drove back to Tribeca through rush hour traffic that moved like congealed blood through the city's arteries. The apartment felt different when Lena walked in. Not physically, same furniture, same view, same coffee maker she'd learned to operate without burning herself. But something had shifted. The space no longer felt borrowed. It felt like hers to claim or leave, a choice instead of a necessity. Adrian hesitated in the doorway. I should go, let you process. If you need anything, stay, Lena said. Then, because the word felt too heavy, I don't want to be alone tonight. Don't want to sit here thinking in circles about the trial and what comes next and whether I did enough. You did more than enough. Stay anyway. He stayed. They ordered takeout from the Thai place down the block that Lena had become quietly obsessed with, ate it on the couch while some cooking competition show played on television, background noise that required no emotional investment. Adrian told her about a security contract gone sideways in Boston. Lena told him about one of her regular patients at Mount Sinai, an elderly woman who flirted with every male doctor and kept a running commentary on hospital gossip. Normal conversation. Easy. The kind of interaction that had nothing to do with trauma or rescue or the complicated power dynamics of being saved. Around 10 p.m., exhaustion hit Lena like a physical blow. The adrenaline that had carried her through the trial drained away all at once, leaving her hollow and heavy. I need to sleep, she said. I'll head out. You could stay. The offer came out before she'd fully thought it through. The couch is comfortable, or there's the guest room. She stopped, tried to articulate the feeling. I don't want to wake up alone. Not tonight. Adrian's expression shifted. Okay, guest room. I'll be here if you need anything. Lena nodded. She should say something more. Should acknowledge the strangeness of inviting a man to sleep in her apartment when they hadn't even kissed, when their entire relationship existed in the gray space between gratitude and attraction and something neither of them had named yet. But she was too tired for speeches, too wrung out for analysis. She went to bed and fell asleep almost immediately. Dreamless, deep, the kind of sleep that came from finally setting down a weight she'd been carrying for months. When she woke 6 hours later, pale dawn light filtering through the windows, her first thought wasn't fear. It was possibility. The sentencing hearing 2 weeks later felt almost anticlimactic. Lena sat in the same courtroom, same bench, but this time the weight on her chest was different, lighter. The verdict had already been delivered. This was just the formality of translating guilt into years. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses, and the particular kind of weariness that came from seeing humanity's worst on repeat, reviewed the pre-sentencing report without visible emotion. Ethan stood in his orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, face carefully blank. His public defender made a half-hearted argument for leniency based on his lack of prior convictions, his difficult childhood, all the usual mitigating factors that were supposed to make violence more understandable. Patricia Reeves countered with hospital records, police reports from the restraining order violations, text messages that demonstrated escalating threats. She spoke about patterns of abuse, about the statistical likelihood that Ethan would harm his next partner if given the opportunity, about the need for consequences that matched the severity of the crime. The judge listened to all of it. Then she looked at Ethan over her reading glasses. Mr. Hayes, you have been found guilty of multiple counts of assault, harassment, and stalking. The evidence presented in this case demonstrates a clear pattern of escalating violence against someone you claim to love. You used your physical strength to control, intimidate, and harm Ms. Carter over a period of months. When she found the courage to leave, you continued to threaten her safety through various means. Ethan's jaw tightened. Lena watched the muscle jump and felt nothing except a distant satisfaction that for once, someone else was cataloging his reactions and finding them wanting. I'm sentencing you to 5 years in state prison on the assault charges, to be served consecutively with 2 years for the stalking and harassment charges. That's 7 years total. With good behavior, you might be eligible for parole in 5. The judge paused. I'm also issuing a permanent order of protection. You are not to contact Ms. Carter in any way, directly or through intermediaries, for the rest of your life. Violation of this order will result in additional criminal charges. Do you understand? Yes. Ethan's voice was flat, but Lena could hear the rage underneath. The same rage that used to terrify her. Now it was just sad. A grown man who'd never learned that other people weren't props in his emotional theater. The bailiff led him away. Ethan didn't look at Lena as he passed. She watched him go and felt a chapter close with a finality that was both relief and strangeness. 7 years. He'd be 43 when he got out. She'd be 35. Different people living different lives in a future she couldn't imagine yet. Outside, the April sun was warm enough that Lena had left her coat in the car. Spring in full force now, the city shaking off winter like a dog shedding water. Patricia hugged her briefly. Professional affection, the kind lawyers gave to clients they'd actually grown to care about, and promised to send copies of the sentencing order for her records. "What will you do now?" Patricia asked. Lena looked at Adrian, who was giving her space to have this conversation privately, but staying close enough to intervene if needed. "I don't know yet. Figure out what normal looks like, I guess." "You've earned it. Normal. Boring. Whatever you want to call a life without looking over your shoulder." Patricia smiled. "Take care of yourself, Lena." "I will." Marcus was waiting with the car. Adrian opened the door for her, a gesture that used to feel patronizing but that she'd learned was just how he moved through the world, offering small courtesies without expecting gratitude. She slid into the familiar leather seats and let the tension drain from her shoulders. "Where to?" Adrian asked as he got in beside her. "Honestly, I have no idea." "Home?" "Home." The word still felt strange attached to the Tribeca apartment, but less strange than it had 2 weeks ago. Less temporary. Lena had started leaving things out instead of keeping everything packed and ready to flee. Books on the coffee table, her favorite coffee mug in the dishwasher, a succulent plant on the windowsill that she was trying and mostly failing to keep alive. "Yeah," she said. "Home." They drove through midday traffic, the radio playing something instrumental that required no attention. Lena watched the city slide past and tried to identify what she was feeling. Not happiness exactly, not relief either, though that was part of it. Something more complicated. Like standing on the edge of a pool and knowing you were going to jump, but not quite ready to feel the shock of cold water. Back at the apartment, Adrian made coffee while Lena changed out of the courthouse clothes and into jeans and one of the soft sweaters he'd bought when he'd noticed her wardrobe consisted mostly of scrubs and 3 threadbare shirts. She'd protested the expense. He'd ignored the protest. They developed a rhythm around things like that, him offering help, her accepting it in increments, both of them pretending it was more casual than it actually was. She found him in the kitchen, 2 mugs poured, standing at the window with that particular stillness he had. Lena had learned to read his stillness the way she used to read Ethan's moods, self-preservation instinct repurposed. But Adrian's quiet meant thinking, processing, working through problems in his head, not the dangerous silence that preceded explosions. "You okay?" she asked. "I should be asking you that." "I asked first." Adrian turned from the window. In the afternoon light, the silver in his hair was more visible, the lines around his eyes deeper. He looked tired. Lena realized with a start that she had no idea what the past few months had cost him. The time, the resources, the emotional energy of helping someone rebuild from rubble. "I'm thinking about what comes next," he said. Lena's stomach dropped. This was it. The conversation they'd been avoiding. The one where Adrian explained that the crisis was over. The apartment had always been temporary, and it was time for Lena to stand on her own feet and stop relying on the charity of a stranger who'd caught her on a subway platform. She'd prepared for this. Had been saving money from her paychecks, looking at studio apartments in neighborhoods she could almost afford, planning for the inevitable moment when she'd have to leave. "I need to tell you something," Adrian continued. He set down his coffee mug. "And I need you to listen all the way through before you respond. Okay?" Lena's voice came out smaller than she intended. "The past few months, having you here, it's been—" He stopped, choosing words carefully. "It's reminded me that there are things worth protecting besides assets and clients and abstract concepts of security. You've reminded me that sometimes the most important work is helping one person rebuild a life instead of managing threats for corporations." Lena didn't know where this was going, but it didn't sound like an eviction notice. "I have feelings for you," Adrian said bluntly. "Have had them for a while now. I didn't say anything because you were in crisis and the power dynamic was fucked up. And the last thing you needed was the man helping you escape an abusive relationship, making romantic overtures. Oh, but you're not in crisis anymore. Ethan's going to prison. You have legal protection. You're safe." He met her eyes. "So I'm telling you now, while you still have the freedom to walk away without consequences, that I care about you, more than I should probably care about someone I've known for less than 6 months. And I want to know if there's any possibility you might feel the same way." Lena's heart was doing complicated things in her chest. She set down her own coffee before she dropped it. "I don't know what I feel," she said honestly. "I don't know if what I feel for you is gratitude or attraction or just trauma bonding because you saved me when I was drowning. I don't trust my own judgment about men. I don't trust that I can tell the difference between someone who's actually good and someone who's just better than the last disaster. That's fair? But I think about you when you're not here. I sleep better when you're in the next room. You make me laugh at stupid things, and you don't try to fix me when I'm having a bad day. And I've started planning my week around when I know you'll be around." She paused. "I don't know if that's love or dependency or what, but it's something." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if we figure it out together? No pressure, no timeline. You keep living here if you want, or you find your own place if you need space. We go on actual dates, normal things, movies and dinner and conversations that aren't about legal strategy or PTSD management. See what happens when the crisis is over and we're just two people trying to know each other. What if I'm a mess? What if I have panic attacks or nightmares or days where I can't function because everything reminds me of him? Then we handle it. I've got my own mess, Lena. You've been living with me for months. You've seen it. The insomnia, the control issues, the fact that I trust approximately 3 people on the planet and have contingency plans for everything, including nuclear war." He smiled slightly. "We're both damaged. Maybe we can be damaged together and figure out how to make that work." Lena looked at him, really looked, cataloging all the details she'd been noticing for months without letting herself acknowledge what they meant. The way he made coffee exactly how she liked it without asking. The books that had appeared on the shelves because he'd heard her mention wanting to read them. The quiet protection that never felt like control because it came with the freedom to say no. "I want to try," she heard herself say. "I'm scared as hell, and I don't know if I'm ready, but I want to try." Scared is okay. Scared means you're paying attention. "What if I hurt you?" "What if you don't?" Lena laughed, surprising herself. "Is that your philosophy on everything? Just optimistically assume the best outcome?" "No. I plan for the worst and hope for the best. But with you," Adrian crossed the kitchen, stopping just close enough that Lena could reach for him if she wanted. "With you, I'm willing to risk hoping." She closed the distance. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't the kind of kiss that happened in movies with swelling music and perfect lighting. It was awkward and tentative, and she bumped his nose with hers and had to adjust the angle twice. But it was real, chosen, hers to give instead of taken. When they pulled apart, Adrian was smiling, actual warmth in his face, the careful control loosening just enough to show what lived underneath. "So," he said, "dinner? Actual date? I know a place in the West Village that does this thing with scallops that might change your life." "Are you always this dramatic about food?" "Only when I'm trying to impress someone." They went to dinner. Lena wore a dress she'd bought with her own money from her own paycheck, felt powerful in heels that weren't running from anything. The restaurant was small and intimate, the kind of place where the waitstaff knew Adrian by name but didn't make a fuss about it. They talked about everything except trauma and trials and terrible ex-boyfriends. Adrian told her about growing up in Queens, about the brother he'd lost to gang violence when he was 17, about how that loss had shaped his entire career trajectory. Lena talked about foster care, about the teachers who'd seen potential in her when she'd seen nothing, about the weird satisfaction of successfully placing an IV on the first try. It felt normal, blessedly, beautifully normal, walking home. Because Adrian's place in Tribeca was close enough to walk, and Lena wanted to feel the city around her, wanted to prove she could exist in it without fear. Lena took his hand, tested the gesture. It felt right, easy, like something she'd been doing for years instead of experimenting with for the first time. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always. That night on the subway platform, what made you catch me? There were other people around. You could have let someone else handle it." Adrian was quiet for half a block. "You looked like someone who'd forgotten she was allowed to fall. Like you'd been holding yourself up for so long that collapsing felt like failure instead of just physics." He paused. "And I know what that's like. Pretending you're fine when you're disintegrating. I saw you and I saw myself at 17 and I couldn't just walk away." "I'm glad you didn't. Me too." They climbed the stairs to the apartment. Lena had started taking stairs instead of the elevator, building strength, proving to herself that she could, and found everything exactly as they'd left it. Safe, unchanged. The life she was building waiting patiently for her to step into it. "Do you want me to stay?" Adrian asked. "Or should I go back to my place, give you space to process?" Lena thought about it, about what she wanted versus what she thought she should want, about the difference between need and choice. "Stay," she said. "But maybe in the guest room still. I'm not ready for more than kissing and hand-holding. Not yet." "That works for me." They settled into a routine over the following weeks. Adrian stayed over 3 or 4 nights a week, always in the guest room, always respecting the boundaries Lena set even when she couldn't quite articulate what they were. They went on dates, museums and movies, and a comedy show in Brooklyn that made Lena laugh so hard she cried. They cooked dinner together, argued about whether cilantro tasted like soap, discovered they had the same terrible taste in reality television. Lena went back to therapy. Not court-mandated crisis counseling, but actual long-term work with a woman named Dr. Shapiro, who didn't try to fix her or rush her, or suggest she should be grateful she'd escaped. They worked on unpacking 8 months of abuse, 2 years of a relationship that had probably been unhealthy from the start, a childhood in foster care that had taught her attachment was dangerous. Slow work, painful work. The kind of healing that happened in increments so small she sometimes couldn't see progress until she looked back and realized how far she'd come. She started sleeping through the night, started eating without calculating whether each meal would make Ethan angry, started making decisions based on what she wanted instead of what would keep her safe. At work, her supervisor noticed the change, pulled her aside one day during a rare quiet moment in the ER. "Whatever you're doing, Carter, keep doing it. You look like an actual human being instead of a zombie." Lena laughed. "Thanks, I think." "I'm serious. You're better with patience, more present. I don't know what changed, but it's working." What had changed was everything. But Lena just smiled and said she'd been getting more sleep. June arrived with the particular humidity that made New York feel like a sauna. Adrian's air conditioning became a frequent refuge. They spent a Saturday on his couch, fan blowing directly on them, arguing about whether to order Thai or Italian, and eventually just ordering both. "I've been thinking," Adrian said during a lull in conversation. "Dangerous activity." "I'm serious. I've been thinking about the security company, about what I actually want to be doing with it." Lena turned to look at him. "And?" "And I want to shift focus. Less corporate security, more protection for people who can't afford it. Domestic violence survivors. People leaving dangerous situations. Setting up safe houses, funding legal representation, providing actual resources instead of just pointing people toward shelters that are already overcrowded. That's a big shift. It's the work that matters. I've got enough money from the corporate contracts to fund it for years, and He paused. "Meeting you reminded me why I started this in the first place. Protection isn't about guarding buildings or assets. It's about making sure people can live without fear." Lena felt something warm expand in her chest. "You're going to help other people like me." I'm going to try. I want to build something that could have helped you before you had to collapse on a subway platform and hope a stranger caught you. That's a terrible business model. Good thing I'm not doing it for the profit margin. Lena kissed him, long and slow, the kind of kiss that said things she wasn't ready to articulate yet. When they pulled apart, Adrian's eyes had gone dark in the way they did when he was feeling things he didn't quite have words for. Move in with me, he said, officially. Not as someone I'm helping, but as my partner. We'll figure out the details, whose furniture stays, whose terrible decorating choices get vetoed, but I want you here because you want to be, not because you have nowhere else to go. I have somewhere else to go now, Lena pointed out. I've been looking at apartments, found a few in my price range. I know. I saw the listings on your laptop. And you're asking anyway? I'm asking because I want to wake up and know you're here. Want to come home and find your shoes in the hallway and your coffee mug in the sink. Want to build something with you that isn't about crisis or rescue or any of the circumstances that brought us together. Lena's throat tightened. What if we don't work? What if we try this and realize we were only good in an emergency? Then we figure it out like adults. But I'd rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. You're very persuasive when you want something. Is it working? Lena thought about her apartment searches, the studios she'd looked at with their sad kitchenettes and questionable heating. Thought about what she'd been planning, a life of careful independence, proving she could stand alone. It was a good plan, a safe plan. But safe wasn't the same as happy. Yeah, she said, it's working, I'll stay. Adrian's smile was worth every moment of uncertainty. They celebrated with the Thai and Italian food that had finally arrived, eating too much and arguing about what to watch on television, and falling asleep on the couch in a tangle of limbs that would make them both regret it in the morning. Lena woke around 3 a.m., disoriented and stiff from the awkward angle. Adrian was still asleep, one arm around her waist, breathing deep and even. She could slip away, go to her own bed, maintain the careful distance they'd been keeping. Instead, she settled back against him and closed her eyes. The nightmares came less frequently now. When they did, she had someone to wake her up gently, remind her where she was, that the danger had passed, that she was allowed to sleep peacefully, that safety wasn't something she had to earn or defend or apologize for wanting. July brought a heat wave that broke records and made everyone in the city irritable and slow. Lena picked up extra shifts at the hospital. Saved money she didn't strictly need anymore, but liked having as insurance against uncertainty. Adrian launched the new division of his security company, Safe Haven Solutions, they called it, which Lena thought was a bit on the nose but didn't say so. Their first client was a woman named Maria, whose husband had put her in the hospital twice. Adrian's team moved her and her 2 kids to a secure apartment, got her connected with legal aid, helped her file for divorce and full custody. Lena watched him work and saw the same intensity he'd brought to her own situation, the same refusal to accept that some people were beyond help. You're good at this, she told him one night after he'd come home exhausted from a 14-hour day coordinating a particularly complex extraction. It's not enough. There are thousands of people trapped in situations like you were, and I can help maybe dozens. Dozens is more than 0. Doesn't feel like enough. Lena understood that feeling, the inadequacy of small victories against massive problems. But she'd learned in nursing that you couldn't save everyone, couldn't fix everything, and trying to carry that weight would crush you. You do what you can, she said. You help who you can help. The rest, you trust that someone else will catch them, the way you caught me. Adrian pulled her close, pressed his face against her hair. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention. August marked 6 months since the subway platform. Lena hadn't planned to track the anniversary, but her brain kept count anyway. 6 months of safety. 6 months of learning to trust that good things weren't preludes to disaster. 6 months of building a relationship that looked nothing like what she'd had with Ethan, and everything like what she'd stopped believing was possible. They were grocery shopping, mundane, domestic, the kind of activity that used to feel like a minefield of potential triggers, when Lena saw him. Not Ethan. He was safely locked away in prison, scheduled for release in a future so distant it felt abstract. But one of his friends, Derek, who'd been there the night Ethan had first hit her, who'd laughed about it later like domestic violence was comedy. Derek saw her too. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something ugly. "Well, if it isn't Ethan's lying bitch," he said, loud enough that people in adjacent aisles turned to look. "Heard you sent him to prison. That must make you feel real proud, destroying a man's life over a few arguments." Lena's heart kicked into overdrive. Old instincts screamed at her to apologize, to make herself small, to defuse the situation before it escalated. But she wasn't that person anymore. Hadn't been for months. "He destroyed his own life by choosing violence," she said, voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I just made sure he faced consequences. You're a piece of work, you know that? He loved you, gave you everything. And you? He gave me bruises and threats and 8 months of being terrified in my own home." Lena stepped forward instead of back. "So yeah, I testified. I told the truth, and I'd do it again." Derek's face flushed. He moved toward her, and Adrian materialized between them so fast Lena barely tracked the movement. "Back up," Adrian said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but something in it made Derek freeze mid-step. "You're going to turn around, finish your shopping, and leave this store. If you approach her again, if you contact her in any way, I'll make sure you regret it. We clear?" Derek looked at Adrian, really looked, taking in the height and the build and the particular kind of stillness that suggested violence wouldn't be theoretical if it came to that. Whatever he saw made him recalculate. "Whatever, she's not worth it anyway." He left. Adrian stayed between Lena and the retreating figure until Derek was out of sight, then turned to her. "You okay?" Lena's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Yeah, I'm okay. I stood up to him. I didn't apologize or make excuses or any of the things I would have done 6 months ago. You were incredible. I was terrified. Brave and terrified aren't mutually exclusive." They finished shopping. Lena's heart rate didn't fully settle until they were home, groceries put away, door locked behind them. But she'd done it. Faced someone from her past and held her ground. Proof that the changes weren't just internal, weren't just therapy exercises and positive self-talk. She was different, actually genuinely different. That night, after dinner and a movie and the comfortable routine they'd developed, Lena made a decision. "I want you to stay," she said. "Not in the guest room, with me." Adrian looked up from the book he'd been reading. "You sure?" "I'm sure. I've been sure for a while, just scared to say it. But I don't want to be scared anymore. I want to choose things because I want them, not because fear is making decisions for me. Okay? Simple agreement, no pressure. But if you change your mind, if it's too much, you tell me and we adjust. This isn't... I don't have expectations, Lena. Whatever you're comfortable with is what we do." They moved slowly, carefully, learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with crisis and everything to do with trust. It wasn't perfect. Lena had moments of panic, times when touch felt like too much, and she had to stop and breathe through it. But Adrian was patient, and she was learning to be patient with herself, and gradually the fear receded enough to let other things in. Desire, intimacy, the particular kind of vulnerability that came from letting someone see all of you and believing they wouldn't use it as a weapon. Afterward, lying in the dark with Adrian's arm around her waist and the city humming outside the windows, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of problems or the erasure of her past, just the simple, profound knowledge that she was exactly where she chose to be, with someone who saw her clearly and stayed anyway. "I love you," she said into the darkness, testing the words, seeing how they felt in her mouth. Adrian's arm tightened around her. "I love you too. Even though I'm a mess?" "You're not a mess. You're someone who survived something terrible and is rebuilding from it. That's not the same thing. You're just saying that because you love me." "I'm saying it because it's true." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "And because I love you." Lena smiled against the pillow and let herself fall asleep in his arms, dreaming of nothing except tomorrow. September arrived with cooler air and the particular quality of light that made New York feel like a city built for new beginnings. Lena stood at the windows of the apartment. Their apartment now, officially, her name added to the lease 2 weeks ago, and watched the sunrise paint the buildings gold. Behind her, she could hear Adrian moving around the kitchen, the familiar sounds of morning routines they'd built together over months of learning each other's rhythms. She'd stopped taking extra shifts at Mount Sinai, had started saying no when the charge nurse asked if she could cover for someone, had begun protecting her time the way Dr. Shapiro kept encouraging her to. The hospital would survive without her martyrdom. She'd nearly died from it. "Coffee's ready," Adrian called. Lena turned from the window and found him holding 2 mugs, still wearing the t-shirt he'd slept in, hair going in 3 different directions. This version of him, unguarded, comfortable, fully himself, was her favorite. Better than the controlled businessman in expensive suits, better than the protective security expert who'd caught her on that platform. This was just Adrian. Hers. She took the coffee and kissed him. "What time is the meeting with the foundation lawyer?" 10. Which gives us 2 hours to go over the paperwork and make sure we're not missing anything. The foundation had been Adrian's idea, but it had grown into something they were building together. The Safe Haven Foundation, designed to provide comprehensive support for domestic violence survivors, legal aid, temporary housing, job training, therapy, everything Lena wished had existed when she'd been trapped with nowhere to turn. They'd filed the nonprofit paperwork in August, and today they were finalizing the legal structure that would make it official. "I still can't believe we're doing this," Lena said, having second thoughts. "No, just a year ago I was sleeping on subway trains because I was too scared to go home. Now I'm helping launch a foundation. It feels surreal." Adrian set down his mug and pulled her close. "You survived something terrible and decided to use it to help other people. That's not surreal. That's the most logical thing in the world. When did you become such an optimist?" "I'm not an optimist. I'm a realist who happens to be in love with someone who makes me believe good things are possible." Lena tucked herself against his chest and breathed him in. Coffee and laundry detergent and the particular scent that was just Adrian. Home had stopped being a place and become a person. She was still getting used to that. They spent the morning reviewing documents. Lena had insisted on understanding every detail, refusing to just sign where Adrian told her to. She'd spent too many years letting other people make decisions about her life. Now she read every clause, asked questions until she understood the answers, claimed her role in this partnership the same way she'd learned to claim space in their relationship. The meeting with the lawyer went smoothly. By noon, they had a fully operational nonprofit with Lena listed as co-founder and director of survivor services. The title felt too big, like clothing she'd grow into eventually, but she was learning that growth happened in the wearing, not in waiting until you were ready. "Lunch?" Adrian suggested as they left the lawyer's office in Midtown. "We should celebrate." "I have a better idea. Let's go to the subway." Adrian looked at her questioningly. "Any particular reason?" "Yeah, there's something I need to do." They took the train to 103rd Street. Lena hadn't been back since that night a year ago. Hadn't needed to. The hospital was accessible from other stations, and she'd actively avoided this platform the way you avoided places where bad things happened. But she wasn't avoiding anymore. The station looked exactly the same. Yellow tile walls, the perpetual smell of hot metal and humanity, the distant rumble of approaching trains. Lena stood in the spot where she'd collapsed, where gravity and exhaustion and 8 months of abuse had finally pulled her down. "This is where you caught me," she said. "I remember. I was so scared that night, of everything, of going home, of being alone, of accepting help from a stranger. I thought the worst thing that could happen was hitting the ground." She turned to look at Adrian. "But the worst thing would have been nobody catching me. Going home. Staying trapped because I was too afraid to imagine anything different. You would have found a way out eventually. Maybe. Or maybe I would have ended up another statistic, another woman who stayed too long and paid for it." Lena took a breath. "I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm just saying thank you for catching me, for not letting go, for showing me what it looks like when someone helps without demanding payment." Adrian's expression went soft. "You never have to thank me for that." "I know, but I wanted to say it anyway. Here, where it started." A train pulled in, disgorging passengers who flowed around them like water around stones. Lena watched them go, people living their lives, carrying their own crises and triumphs and mundane daily struggles. Any one of them could be her a year ago. Any one of them might need catching. That's what the foundation was for, to make sure people didn't have to collapse and hope a stranger noticed. They stayed at the platform for a few more minutes, then headed back uptown. The city had shifted into afternoon mode, slower, warmer. The particular energy that came after the lunch rush but before evening chaos. Lena and Adrian walked instead of taking the train, covering blocks in comfortable silence, punctuated by observations about street vendors and construction, and the eternal mystery of why anyone would pay $15 for juice. At home, Lena changed into workout clothes for the self-defense class she'd started taking in July. Adrian had suggested it carefully, aware that anything involving physical contact could be triggering, but Lena had wanted to learn how to fight back, how to protect herself in ways that didn't require depending on someone else's intervention. The class was all women, taught by a former military combat instructor who understood that self-defense for survivors was as much about reclaiming agency as learning techniques. "I'll pick you up after?" Adrian asked. "You don't have to. I can take the subway." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Lena kissed him. "Okay, but only because you're on the way." The class was hard. 90 minutes of learning to strike effectively, to use an attacker's momentum against them, to override the freeze response and fight back. Lena left drenched in sweat and buzzing with adrenaline, feeling powerful in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's permission. Adrian was waiting outside in the car. She slid into the passenger seat and immediately started talking about what she'd learned, demonstrating a palm strike that made him flinch reflexively. "Remind me never to piss you off," he said. "You couldn't piss me off if you tried. You're too reasonable. Give it time. I'm sure I'll figure out how to be annoying eventually." They stopped for Thai food on the way home, the same place they'd ordered from a dozen times, where the owner now knew their usual orders and always threw in extra spring rolls. Small routines, normal life. The kind of boring, beautiful ordinary that Lena had stopped believing she deserved. After dinner, she found herself restless. Too much energy from the class, too many thoughts circling about the foundation and what came next, and the strange fortune of having rebuilt a life from absolute rubble. "Walk?" she suggested. They ended up at Battery Park again, the place they'd come the day of the verdict. The city spread before them in lights and noise, ferries cutting through dark water, tourists taking pictures of the Statue of Liberty, holding her torch against the night sky. "I've been thinking," Lena said. "Should I be worried? I want to go back to school. Not right away, maybe in a year, but I want to get my teaching certification. Elementary education like I used to think about before everything got complicated." Adrian smiled. "You'd be a great teacher." "I might be terrible at it. I have no idea if I actually have the patience for 25 kids and lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences." "So you try it and find out. Worst case, you discover teaching isn't for you and you do something else. Best case, you love it and you spend the next 30 years shaping young minds, or whatever the inspirational posters say." "When did you become so supportive of my random ideas?" "When I realized that you having dreams again means you've stopped just surviving and started actually living." Lena leaned against the railing and watched the water. A year ago, she'd had no dreams. No capacity for imagination beyond making it through each day without getting hurt. Now she was thinking about graduate school and career changes and a future that extended further than the next shift. "I'm pregnant," she said. The words hung in the air between them. Lena hadn't planned to say it like this, blurted out at a park railing with no preamble or careful staging. But the knowledge had been building in her chest all day, demanding to be spoken. Adrian went very still beside her. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 6 weeks. I took a test this morning while you were in the shower, and then another one to make sure, and they were both positive." She turned to look at him. "I know we haven't talked about kids. I know this isn't planned. If you're not ready, or if this isn't what you want, I understand, and we can figure out—" "Lena." Adrian's voice cut through her spiral. "Are you happy about it?" She thought about the question, about the terror of bringing a child into a world that still felt fragile sometimes, about whether she was healed enough to be someone's mother, about all the ways she could fail at this, the way she'd failed at so many things. But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt like hope. "Yeah," she said, "I'm happy. Scared out of my mind, but happy." "Then I'm happy too." Adrian pulled her into his arms, and she felt his heart hammering against her cheek. "We're having a baby." "Are you sure? Because this is a huge thing, and you didn't sign up for—" "I signed up for you. Everything that comes with you, everything you want to build, every crazy direction this life takes us." I'm in, Lena. Completely in. She let herself cry against his shoulder, relief and joy and the overwhelming reality that she was going to be someone's mother, that she'd get a chance to do better than what had been done to her. Adrian held her through it, solid and steady, and exactly what she needed. We should tell people, she said eventually. Your friends, my coworkers, Dr. Shapiro definitely needs to know because we're going to have a lot to unpack in therapy. We have time. We can tell people when you're ready. They walked home slowly, Lena's hand in Adrian's, talking about the logistics of pregnancy and babies and how they'd need to convert the guest room into a nursery. It felt surreal and terrifying and absolutely right. The next few months passed in a blur of doctor's appointments and morning sickness that lasted all day, and Adrian reading pregnancy books with the same intensity he brought to security contracts. Lena told her supervisor at Mount Sinai, who congratulated her and immediately started planning the maternity leave coverage. She told Dr. Shapiro, who smiled and said this was exactly the kind of plot twist that made therapy interesting. The foundation officially launched in November with a small ceremony and press coverage that made Lena deeply uncomfortable. She hated seeing her photo in articles about domestic violence, hated being positioned as some kind of inspiration when she'd just been trying not to die. But Adrian reminded her that her story gave people hope, showed them that escape was possible, that life could be rebuilt. They helped their first client that same week, a woman named Sarah, whose boyfriend had broken her jaw and 3 ribs. Lena sat with her in the emergency room, held her hand through the police report, helped her understand that pressing charges wasn't betrayal, but self-preservation. Watching Sarah move into one of Safe Haven's secure apartments, seeing her start to believe she deserved safety, Lena understood why they'd built this. Why her own pain could become someone else's lifeline. December brought snow and the particular chaos of New York during the holidays. Lena was 16 weeks pregnant, finally past the worst of the nausea, her body starting to change in ways that felt miraculous and strange. Adrian had become obsessive about her health, making sure she ate regularly, monitoring her stress levels, treating her like she was made of glass. I'm pregnant, not broken, she told him after he'd insisted on carrying groceries that weighed maybe 10 pounds total. I know, but you're carrying our child, and I'm allowed to be protective. There's protective and then there's ridiculous. I'll work on finding the line. They spent Christmas with the small circle of people they'd gathered, Marcus and his wife, Patricia Reeves, who'd become a friend after the trial, a few of Adrian's security team who'd been involved in Lena's case. No family, because neither of them had any that mattered, but chosen family counted just as much. Lena's favorite gift was from Adrian, a leather journal with her initials embossed on the cover. For writing down everything, he explained. Your thoughts, your fears, what you want to tell our kids someday about how we got here. I know you're not big on journaling, but I thought maybe you'd want to document this. She started writing that night. Not every day, but when the mood struck, documenting the ordinary and the extraordinary. Morning sickness at 3 a.m., the first time she felt the baby move, Sarah's text saying she'd filed for divorce and felt like herself again for the first time in years. January marked exactly 1 year since that night on the subway platform. Lena woke early, Adrian still sleeping beside her, and lay in the pre-dawn quiet thinking about everything that had changed. A year ago, she'd been broken and terrified and convinced she'd never be anything else. Now she was building a foundation, carrying a child, living a life so far beyond what she'd thought possible that it still sometimes felt like someone else's story. She got up carefully, trying not to wake Adrian, and went to the windows. The city was just starting to stir, early commuters, delivery trucks, the eternal rhythm of New York refusing to sleep. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. 1 month in the new apartment. First morning, I woke up not afraid. Thank you for showing me this was possible. Lena smiled and typed back. You did the hard part. I just helped you see it. Adrian found her there 20 minutes later, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunrise. You okay? He asked. Better than okay. I was just thinking about how much has changed. Any regrets? Not a single one. He settled beside her, and they watched the morning arrive together. In a few hours, they had a foundation board meeting. In a few months, they'd have a baby. In the years after that, who knew what would come? But Lena had stopped being afraid of the future, had learned that life could be rebuilt from nothing, that love didn't have to hurt, that falling didn't mean you stayed down. February brought an unexpected letter. Prison mail, Ethan's name on the return address. Lena stared at it for a full minute before opening it, Adrian watching carefully from across the kitchen. The letter was surprisingly coherent. Ethan had been in therapy, court-mandated but apparently effective. He'd written to apologize, not to ask for forgiveness, but to acknowledge what he'd done. To say he understood why she'd pressed charges, that he was glad she'd gotten out, that he hoped she'd built a good life. "I don't know why I'm even writing this," the letter concluded. "You don't owe me a response. You don't owe me anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better than the person who hurt you. Not for you. For whoever I am when I get out of here. I'm sorry for everything, Lena. You deserved better. You always did." Lena set the letter down and felt nothing except a distant kind of closure. This was probably the best Ethan could do. Recognize his failure, work on himself, leave her alone. It would never undo the damage, never erase the 8 months of terror. But it was something. "You going to respond?" Adrian asked. "No, he's right. I don't owe him anything. But I'm glad he's getting help. Glad he's trying to change." She threw the letter away. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, just folded it and dropped it in the trash, same as junk mail. Some things didn't deserve space in her life, even as memories. March brought warmer weather in Lena's third trimester. She'd had to cut back hours at the hospital. Her feet couldn't handle 12-hour shifts anymore, her back protesting the constant standing. But she'd ramped up work with the foundation, training volunteers, developing programs, building something that would outlast her personal involvement. They learned they were having a girl. Adrian cried when the ultrasound tech told them actual tears that he didn't try to hide. Lena teased him about it for days. "I'm allowed to be emotional," he protested. "We're having a daughter. We're having a tiny human who's currently using my bladder as a punching bag. She's going to be incredible. She's going to have your strength and your compassion and your terrible taste in reality television. Hey, don't blame me for your Bachelor addiction. I only watch it because you do." Liar. They argued about names for weeks. Adrian wanted something classic. Lena wanted something meaningful. They finally settled on Elena Grace, close enough to Lena's name to feel connected, different enough to be her own person. Grace as a middle name, because that's what they'd both been given when they'd needed it most. April arrived with cherry blossoms and the particular energy of a city emerging from winter. Lena was 36 weeks pregnant, enormous and uncomfortable, and counting down to her due date with a mixture of anticipation and terror. She'd read every parenting book Adrian had bought, taken birthing classes, prepared as much as anyone could prepare for the reality of bringing a human into the world. But late at night, when Adrian was asleep and the city quieted to its minimal hum, Lena still worried. About being a good mother, about breaking cycles of abandonment and abuse, about whether love would be enough when she barely remembered being loved as a child. Dr. Shapiro reminded her that worry was normal, that awareness of potential pitfalls was actually protective, that she'd already proven she could choose to be better than what had been modeled for her. "You got yourself out," Dr. Shapiro said during one of their sessions. "You rebuilt your entire life from nothing. You're launching a foundation to help others do the same. Trust that the same strength that got you here will carry you through motherhood." "What if I mess her up?" "You will. All parents do. The goal isn't perfection, it's love and repair. You hurt her feelings, you apologize and do better. You make a mistake, you acknowledge it and grow. That's what breaks the cycle." Lena held on to that during the long nights when her daughter kicked hard enough to keep her awake. Love and repair. She could do that. The contractions started on a Tuesday morning in late April. Lena was folding laundry, nesting instinct in full force, when the first one hit. Not painful yet, just a tightening that made her pause and breathe through it. "Adrian," she called, "I think it's time." He appeared instantly, already reaching for the hospital bag they'd packed 3 weeks ago. "How far apart are the contractions?" "That was the first one. We have time. Probably hours. We should go now. We should wait until they're closer together, like the doctor said. Or we could go now and be safe." Lena smiled despite the growing tension in her abdomen. "You're panicking." "I'm being cautious." "You're panicking. It's cute." They compromised. Waited until contractions were 10 minutes apart, then headed to Mount Sinai, the same hospital where Lena had worked for years, where she'd treated countless patients and never imagined being one herself. The staff knew her, greeted her by name, settled her into a delivery room with the easy competence of people who did this every day. Labor was nothing like the books described. It was harder, longer, more brutal than any metaphor could capture. Lena had delivered babies, had watched women go through this, but experiencing it was entirely different. She understood now why people screamed, why they begged for drugs, or mercy, or both. Adrian stayed with her through all of it, held her hand during contractions, advocated for her when she couldn't speak, didn't flinch when she cursed him for getting her pregnant in the first place. "You did this to me," she panted between contractions. "I know. I'm sorry. You're incredible. I love you. I hate you right now." That's fair. 18 hours after the first contraction, Elena Grace Valenti entered the world screaming. The nurse placed her on Lena's chest, tiny, wrinkled, covered in vernix and blood, and absolutely perfect. Lena looked at her daughter and felt something crack open in her chest. Love so fierce it was almost painful. Protectiveness that made every fear she'd ever had feel small by comparison. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered. "I'm your mom. I'm going to mess up sometimes, but I'm going to love you so much, I promise." Elena stopped crying, eyes trying to focus on Lena's face. Adrian leaned in, one hand on Lena's shoulder, staring at their daughter with awe. "She's perfect," he said. "She's ours." They spent the next 2 days in the hospital, learning to nurse and change diapers and interpret different cries. The lack of sleep was staggering, the responsibility terrifying, but underneath it all was joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy at this tiny person they'd created. Going home was surreal. Walking through the door of the apartment with a car seat carrying a human who depended entirely on them for survival. They set Elena down in the bassinet they'd set up in their bedroom and stood there staring at her like she might disappear if they looked away. "We're parents," Lena said. "We're parents," Adrian echoed. "That's insane. Completely insane." The first few weeks were a blur of feeding schedules and diaper changes and trying to sleep in 90-minute increments. Lena had expected to love her daughter. What she hadn't expected was the overwhelming terror that came with it. The constant checking to make sure Elena was breathing, the paranoia about every sound and movement, the weight of knowing another human's survival depended on her not failing. But she and Adrian figured it out. Took shifts so each could sleep, asked for help when they needed it, learned that good enough was actually good enough, that babies were more resilient than they seemed, that love could cover a multitude of parenting uncertainties. The foundation continued operating with Lena working remotely. She'd hired a full-time staff coordinator, a former social worker named Michelle, who understood trauma and systems and how to help people navigate both. Between them, they'd helped 43 people leave dangerous situations since launching. 43 lives changed. 43 people who didn't have to collapse and hope someone caught them. Summer arrived with heat that made the city swelter. Elena was 3 months old, starting to smile at them, tracking movement with her eyes, becoming an actual person instead of just a tiny demanding creature. Lena took her to the park sometimes, joined the other mothers in their exhausted camaraderie, compared notes on sleep schedules and feeding difficulties, and the strange reality of keeping another human alive. She'd stopped waiting for disaster, stopped expecting the good things to be temporary. This was her life now, messy, imperfect, built from the wreckage of who she'd been and the determination to become something better. On a particularly hot day in August, Lena found herself back at the 103rd Street subway platform. Elena strapped to her chest in a carrier, Adrian beside her, standing in the same spot where everything had changed. "Why are we here?" Adrian asked. "Because I wanted Elena to see where her story started. Not where she was born, but where I stopped running and let myself be caught." Lena looked at her daughter, who was staring at the lights with wide eyes. "Someday I'll tell her about that night, about being so lost I couldn't see a way forward, about how you caught me and didn't let go. She'll probably think it's cheesy. Probably. But she'll also know that sometimes falling is just the beginning, that the people who catch you can change everything." Lena turned to Adrian. "That love doesn't have to hurt, that it can heal instead." Adrian kissed her forehead. "You did most of the healing yourself." "Maybe, but you gave me space to do it in. That counts for something." A train pulled in and they got on. Not because they needed to go anywhere in particular, just because Lena wanted to ride the subway with her daughter and her partner and prove to herself that she could. That the trains that had once carried her to terror now just carried her through the city she'd reclaimed. They rode up to Washington Heights, past the stop where Lena's old apartment had been. She didn't feel anything looking at it except relief that it was part of her past. The girl who'd lived there was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who'd learned that survival could evolve into actually living. Back at the apartment that evening, Elena asleep in her bassinet and Adrian reading on the couch, Lena pulled out the journal he'd given her at Christmas. She'd been documenting moments, but she hadn't written the most important thing yet. She wrote it now. Dear Elena, by the time you read this, you'll be old enough to understand that stories don't always start where you think they do. You'll know about the subway platform, about your father catching me when I fell. But the real beginning came earlier, the moment I decided I deserved better than what I'd accepted. The moment I chose survival over surrender. You were born from that choice, from the rebuilt life, the reclaimed strength, the love I learned to trust. You're not the result of trauma. You're the proof that it doesn't get to define everything that comes after. Your father and I aren't perfect. We'll make mistakes. We'll fail you in small ways, and hopefully never in large ones. But we'll love you fiercely and consistently and without conditions. We'll teach you that falling is part of living, that asking for help is strength, that you never have to stay somewhere that hurts you. We'll show you what it looks like when two broken people put themselves back together and build something beautiful from the pieces. You are that something beautiful, Elena. You and the life we're creating and the foundation helping others find their way out of darkness. This is what happens after the rescue. This is what healing looks like. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and chosen and worth every hard step it took to get here. I can't wait to watch you grow into whoever you're meant to be, to see what you build with the freedom we're giving you. Welcome to the world, baby girl. It's messy and hard and absolutely worth fighting for. Love, Mom. Lena closed the journal and set it aside. Outside the windows, the city hummed with its endless energy. Millions of people living their lives, carrying their stories, some of them trapped and some of them free, and all of them trying to figure out how to make it to tomorrow. She'd made it to tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days that had accumulated into a life she'd stopped believing was possible. That night she dreamed of nothing except the future. Elena's first steps, her first words, the foundation growing to help hundreds instead of dozens, holidays with chosen family, ordinary moments that added up to extraordinary change. When she woke, Adrian was already up with Elena, changing her diaper and talking to her in the soft voice he used when he thought no one was listening. Lena watched them from the doorway, her daughter and the man who'd caught her when she fell, and felt gratitude so deep it lived in her bones. This was what happened after survival, after escape, after the verdict and the healing and the slow rebuilding of everything that had been destroyed. This was life. Messy, imperfect, beautiful life. And Lena Carter, survivor, mother, co-founder of a foundation that turned her worst experiences into lifelines for others, was finally, completely living it. The end.